Why consistency matters. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine water. Not a torrential flood, not a dramatic waterfall, but a single drop of water falling onto stone. Again. And again. And again. Over years, over decades, this gentle, persistent droplet carves canyons through solid rock. This is not the power of force. This is the power of consistency. We live in a world obsessed with transformation. We celebrate the dramatic before and after, the overnight success, the sudden breakthrough. But here's what rarely gets discussed: behind every transformation that appears sudden lies an invisible architecture of small, repeated actions. Consistency isn't the glamorous part of achievement, it's the foundational part. It's the difference between who you are and who you're capable of becoming. Let me share something that might surprise you. Consistency is not a talent you're born with. It's not encoded in your DNA, waiting to express itself in some people while bypassing others. Consistency is a skill, a learnable, practicable, improvable skill. Just as you can learn to play an instrument or speak a language, you can learn to show up for yourself day after day, even when motivation has abandoned you, even when the path ahead seems impossibly long. Think about the people you admire. The writer who's published 20 books. The athlete who's mastered their craft. The entrepreneur who built something from nothing. The artist whose work moves you. What separates them from everyone else who started with similar dreams? It's rarely raw talent. It's rarely a single moment of inspiration. It's the accumulated weight of showing up imperfectly, sometimes reluctantly, but reliably across thousands of ordinary days. But here's where it gets interesting: if consistency is simply a skill, why do so many of us struggle with it? Why do our New Year's resolutions evaporate by February? Why do we start projects with burning enthusiasm only to abandon them weeks later? Why does the gap between our intentions and our actions feel like an unbridgeable chasm? The answer lies in understanding three fundamental reasons why people fail to stay consistent. These aren't character flaws. They're patterns that, once recognized, can be transformed. The first pattern is what psychologists call emotional reasoning. This is the belief that you should only act when you feel like acting. It's the voice that says, "I'll go to the gym when I feel motivated," or "I'll work on my project when inspiration strikes." Emotional reasoning treats your feelings as facts, as reliable predictors of what you should do. But here's the truth: your emotions are terrible project managers. They're wonderful advisors, essential messengers, but catastrophic bosses. Your emotions evolved to keep you safe in an ancient world, not to help you write a novel or build a business in the modern one. When you wake up on a cold morning and your body screams at you to stay in bed, that's not laziness, that's your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do: conserve energy and avoid discomfort. The problem isn't the feeling. The problem is believing that the feeling should determine your action. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a musician, let's call her Sarah, who only practiced when she felt inspired. Some weeks, inspiration would strike and she'd play for hours. But most weeks? Nothing. The guitar would sit in the corner, accumulating dust and guilt. After a year, she'd barely progressed. Now imagine another musician, call him David, who practiced for 30 minutes every single day, regardless of how he felt. Some days the practice was magical. Most days it was just practice, clumsy, frustrating, unremarkable. But after a year, David's fingers had developed muscle memory. His ear had trained itself to hear nuance. His brain had wired itself for music. The difference between Sarah and David wasn't talent or passion. It was their relationship with their feelings. Consistent people haven't eliminated these feelings of resistance. They've simply stopped negotiating with them. They've learned to observe the resistance without obeying it. They notice the voice that says "not today" and they think, "interesting," and then they do the thing anyway. This isn't about becoming robotic or denying your humanity. It's about recognizing that discipline is, fundamentally, the ability to act independently of your emotional state. Think of it this way: your feelings are like the weather. Sometimes sunny, sometimes stormy, constantly changing. You wouldn't cancel every outdoor commitment just because the forecast shows clouds. You'd bring an umbrella. You'd wear a jacket. You'd adapt. The same principle applies to your internal weather. You can acknowledge that you don't feel motivated while simultaneously putting on your running shoes. You can notice that writing feels hard today while simultaneously opening your laptop. The feeling and the action don't have to match. Neuroscience backs this up in fascinating ways. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning and decision-making, and your limbic system, the part responsible for emotions and impulses, are constantly in conversation. When you feel resistance to a task, that's your limbic system trying to steer you toward comfort and away from uncertainty. But your prefrontal cortex can override this impulse. Not by fighting it, not by suppressing it, but by simply choosing differently. Each time you act despite the feeling, you strengthen the neural pathway between intention and action. You're literally rewiring your brain for consistency. The second pattern is distraction, but not in the way you might think. Yes, we live in an age of unprecedented distraction. Your phone alone contains more entertainment and information than a person a century ago could access in a lifetime. Social media, streaming services, newsfeeds, messages, games, all competing for fragments of your attention. But the deeper issue isn't the existence of distractions, it's our relationship with them. Distraction thrives in the gap between decision and action. When you're clear about what you're doing and why, distraction loses its power. But when you're ambiguous, when your goals are vague and your reasons are unclear, every notification becomes a valid alternative to the discomfort of uncertain effort. Think of your attention as a spotlight in a dark theater. That spotlight can illuminate anything, the main act on stage, the interesting details in the wings, or the exit signs at the back. Without a clear focal point, your attention will naturally drift toward what's novel, what's easy, what's immediately gratifying. This isn't a moral failing. It's how attention works. Your brain is wired to prioritize stimuli that are new, surprising, or potentially threatening. A notification lighting up your phone triggers that novelty response. An unopened email creates a tiny sense of uncertainty that your brain wants to resolve. These aren't bugs in your operating system, they're features. But they're features designed for a different world. Here's what makes modern distraction particularly insidious: it's engineered. Teams of designers and psychologists have optimized every app, every platform, every notification to capture and hold your attention. Variable reward schedules, the same principle that makes slot machines addictive, are embedded in your social media feeds. The pull-to-refresh gesture mimics the lever on a slot machine. The infinite scroll ensures there's always one more thing to see. These platforms aren't competing for your attention by accident. They're competing for your attention by design, using sophisticated psychological techniques refined through billions of data points. But here's the empowering truth: understanding the mechanism breaks the spell. When you recognize that your urge to check your phone isn't a character weakness but a conditioned response to engineered stimuli, you can address it strategically rather than morally. You're not bad for getting distracted. You're human, interfacing with systems designed to distract you. Consistency requires that you train your spotlight to return, again and again, to what matters most. Not because what matters most is always interesting, but because it's aligned with who you're becoming. This training happens through environment design, which we'll explore in depth later, but it also happens through clarity. When you know exactly what you're working toward and why it matters to you personally, distractions become easier to recognize and dismiss. They're not temptations, they're just noise. Consider the researcher deep in a compelling experiment. Hours pass without checking email, without scrolling, without even eating. This isn't superhuman willpower. It's absorption. When your task is sufficiently engaging and meaningful, distraction doesn't require resistance, it simply doesn't register. The goal, then, isn't to eliminate all distractions through pure willpower. It's to create conditions where your meaningful work can compete on more equal footing with engineered distractions. The third and perhaps most subtle pattern is identity conflict. This is the misalignment between who you say you want to be and who you believe you are. You might set a goal to become a writer, But if your internal identity is someone who doesn't finish things, every attempt to write will create internal friction. You're not just fighting the blank page, you're fighting your own sense of self. Your identity is the story you tell yourself about yourself. It's composed of thousands of small observations you've made about your own behavior over years. I'm not a morning person. I'm not creative. I'm someone who gives up easily. I'm just not disciplined. These statements feel like objective truths, like descriptions of reality. But they're not. They're narratives, stories you've constructed from selective evidence. And here's the crucial part, they're self-fulfilling prophecies. When you believe you're not a morning person, what happens when your alarm goes off? You hit snooze. And then you think, see? I'm not a morning person. The identity predicts the behavior confirms the identity. It's a closed loop. But here's what you don't notice, you're interpreting all your experiences through this lens. You remember every difficult morning and forget the times you woke up easily. You attribute any successful early morning to external factors, I had an important meeting, rather than internal ones. Your brain is running a confirmation bias algorithm, constantly seeking evidence that matches your self-concept. Psychologists call this the self-consistency motive. Humans have a deep need to behave in ways that are consistent with their self-image, even when that self-image is limiting. It's why people sometimes sabotage their own success, not consciously, but because success would require them to update their identity, and identity change is uncomfortable. It requires admitting that who you thought you were might not be who you actually are. Here's the transformative insight, you change your identity by changing your behavior, not the other way around. You don't need to believe you're a writer before you start writing. You become a writer by writing. The identity follows the action, not the other way around. Every time you show up, you're casting a vote for the person you're becoming. Every time you skip, you're casting a vote for who you used to be. James Clear, in his research on habit formation, describes this as identity-based habits. Instead of focusing on outcomes, I want to write a book or even processes. I will write for an hour every day, you focus on identity, I am a writer. Then you ask, what would a writer do in this situation? A writer sits down even when inspiration hasn't arrived. A writer revises even when it's tedious. A writer protects their writing time. The behavior flows from the identity. But there's a subtlety here worth exploring, you can't just declare a new identity and expect your brain to accept it. If you've never written a word but you tell yourself I am a writer, the dissonance will be overwhelming. Your internal evidence contradicts the claim. Instead, you start with small, believable actions. You write one paragraph. That's something a writer does. You've now cast one vote for your writer identity. The next day, you write another paragraph. Another vote. After a week, you've cast 7 votes. Your brain starts to notice a pattern. Maybe I am someone who writes. The identity begins to shift, not through declaration, but through accumulated evidence. This is why consistency matters so profoundly. It's not just about achieving external goals, though it does achieve them. It's about authoring a new version of yourself, one small action at a time. The entrepreneur who checks their email compulsively isn't just wasting time, they're reinforcing an identity as someone who's reactive rather than proactive. The person who hits the gym 3 mornings in a row isn't just building muscle, they're becoming someone who keeps promises to themselves. They're becoming someone who shows up. Your identity is not fixed. It's malleable, constantly being shaped by your behaviors, your choices, your responses to circumstances. Most people don't realize they're the sculptor. They think identity is something that happens to them, something they discover rather than create. But you are both the marble and the sculptor. Every action is a chisel stroke. The question is, are you sculpting intentionally, or are you letting random forces shape you? This brings us to a profound realization about the nature of consistency itself. Consistency isn't about perfection. It's about pattern. It's not about never missing a day, it's about what you do after you miss a day. Do you use the miss as evidence that you're someone who doesn't follow through? Or do you treat it as an anomaly, a deviation from your pattern, and return to your practice the next day? Imagine two people learning to meditate. Both commit to daily practice. Both miss a day in their first week. Person A thinks, "See, I knew I couldn't stick with this. I'm just not disciplined enough." They've interpreted the miss through their existing identity as someone who doesn't follow through. The missed day becomes terminal. Not just a break in the practice, but evidence against their capability. They might try again later, but they're now carrying additional weight, the belief that they've already failed once. Person B has the same missed day. But they think, "That's unusual. I normally practice daily." Notice the subtle shift? They've already internalized a new identity as someone who practices daily. The miss is an exception, not a revelation. The next morning, they sit down to meditate again, and their streak isn't starting over, it's continuing with a small interruption. Person B isn't more disciplined than person A. They're working with a different story about who they are. The beautiful paradox of consistency is this: it's built from individual moments that feel almost insignificant. One workout doesn't transform your body. One page doesn't create a book. One healthy meal doesn't reset your metabolism. In the moment, these actions can feel pointless, like drops in an infinite ocean. But these moments aren't insignificant. They're votes. They're evidence. They're the raw material from which your future self is constructed. Think about compound interest not in financial terms, but in behavioral ones. If you invest $1 at 1% daily compound interest, after a year you don't have $365. You have $3,778. The same principle applies to your behaviors. One push-up today doesn't give you strength. But one push-up today, tomorrow, and the next day starts to compound. Your muscles adapt. Your habit solidifies. Your identity shifts. After a year, you're not just someone who's done 365 push-ups. You're someone who exercises. The compound returns aren't just physical, they're psychological. This is why people fail at consistency. They expect linear returns on logarithmic investments. They do something once and don't see results, so they assume it's not working. They miss the invisible accumulation happening beneath the surface. A bamboo plant spends years developing its root system underground, with almost no visible growth above ground. Then, in a matter of weeks, it shoots up 90 feet. Was the growth sudden? Or was it the culmination of years of hidden development? Your consistent actions are like that bamboo's roots. For a long time, nothing seems to happen. You write every day, but the book isn't done. You practice the guitar, but you still sound like a beginner. You eat well, but the scale doesn't budge. This is the valley of disappointment, the gap between when you start a habit and when you see results. Most people quit in this valley. They don't realize they're 3 feet from gold. But here's what's actually happening during that invisible period: your brain is rewiring. Your body is adapting. Your identity is shifting. Neural pathways are being carved. Muscle memory is being encoded. Your sense of self is being updated, one vote at a time. You just can't see it yet. The results aren't absent, they're accumulated, waiting to manifest once they cross a threshold. As we journey deeper into understanding consistency, we'll explore not just why it matters, but how to build it practically, sustainably, in a way that honors your humanity rather than fighting it. We'll examine the architecture of habits, the science of willpower, the art of environment design, and the psychology of self-compassion. We'll discover strategies that make showing up easier, systems that reduce friction, and frameworks that turn intentions into automatic behaviors. But before we get tactical, before we dive into the how, I want you to sit with this understanding: consistency is available to you. Not as a distant aspiration, not as something you'll achieve once you become a different person. Right now. With whatever you have. The water droplet doesn't apologize for its size. It doesn't wait until it feels powerful enough to shape stone. It simply falls, again and again, trusting in the accumulated power of persistent action. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be ready. You don't need to feel motivated or inspired or confident. You just need to be willing. Willing to show up. Willing to start before you're ready. Willing to be clumsy and imperfect and uncertain. Willing to cast one vote today for the person you're becoming. The stone doesn't believe the water can change it. The stone is hard, solid, unmovable. The water is soft, transient, seemingly powerless. But the water has something the stone doesn't, it keeps coming back. And in that persistence lies a power greater than force, greater than talent, greater than any single moment of inspired action. That same patient power lives in you. Not someday. Not when circumstances align. Not when you feel ready. Right now, in this moment, you have the ability to take one small action aligned with who you want to become. And then another. And another. Not because you're certain it will work, but because that's what consistent people do. They show up, especially when it's hard, especially when it doesn't feel like it matters. The question isn't whether you can be consistent. You can. The question is, who do you want to become, and are you willing to show up for that person, one unremarkable day at a time? Are you willing to cast votes for a new identity even before you believe it? Are you willing to trust in the invisible accumulation, the hidden compounding, the patient power of repeated action? This is where transformation begins. Not in a moment of dramatic decision, but in the quiet choice to show up again tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. The gap between who you are and who you want to be isn't bridged by inspiration. It's bridged by repetition. By consistency. By becoming the kind of person who does what they said they would do. So let's begin this journey together. Let's explore how to build this skill of consistency, how to navigate emotional reasoning and resist distraction and resolve identity conflict. Let's discover how ordinary people create extraordinary lives through the simple, profound act of showing up. The stone is waiting. The water is ready. And so are you. Chapter 1: The Psychology of Daily Discipline. How the Brain Seeks Comfort. Let's start with a truth that might feel uncomfortable. Your brain is not designed to help you achieve your goals. It's designed to keep you alive. And in the ancient calculus of survival, alive means safe, and safe means comfortable, and comfortable means conserving energy and avoiding risk. Your brain is an exquisite prediction machine, constantly running simulations of the future based on patterns from the past, and its primary directive is simple: minimize threat, maximize reward, conserve resources. This is why discipline feels hard. You're not fighting laziness or weakness. You're fighting millions of years of evolutionary programming that says uncertainty is dangerous, effort is expensive, and the familiar, even when the familiar is limiting, is safer than the unknown. When you set an alarm to wake up early and exercise, you're proposing something radical to your nervous system. You're suggesting voluntary discomfort, leaving a warm bed, exposing yourself to cold air, expending precious energy, with no immediate survival payoff. Your limbic system, the ancient part of your brain responsible for emotion and impulse, sounds the alarm. It floods you with resistance, with a visceral sense that staying in bed is the right choice. This isn't a character flaw. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. Understanding this mechanism is liberating. When you feel resistance to doing something you've committed to, you can recognize it for what it is: an evolutionary safety protocol responding to perceived threat. The resistance isn't telling you the truth about what you should do. It's telling you that your brain has categorized this action as uncomfortable, uncertain, or effortful. And your brain's job is to steer you away from those categories. But here's where it gets fascinating: your brain is also remarkably adaptable. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Every time you override the impulse for comfort and choose discipline instead, you're not just accomplishing a task. You're rewiring your brain. You're teaching your nervous system that this action is safe, that this discomfort is survivable, that this uncertainty leads to reward. Think of neural pathways like trails through a forest. The first time you walk a new route, you're pushing through undergrowth, stepping over fallen logs, creating a barely visible path. It's effortful. The second time, slightly easier, you can see where you walked before. The 10th time, there's a discernible trail. The 100th time, it's a well-worn path that's easy to follow. The 1000th time, it's practically a highway. This is what happens in your brain when you repeat behaviors. The neural pathway becomes stronger, more automatic, more efficient. Initially, discipline requires conscious effort. You have to manually override your comfort-seeking impulses using your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function, planning, and self-control. This process consumes glucose. It's metabolically expensive. It's why discipline feels draining at first. But as the behavior repeats, something remarkable happens. It begins to transfer from conscious control to automatic processing. The behavior moves from your prefrontal cortex to your basal ganglia, the part of your brain responsible for habits and automated behaviors. This is the neurological foundation of discipline becoming easier over time. You're not building willpower. You're building automation. You're creating neural pathways that make the discipline choice the default rather than the effortful exception. But let's talk about what happens when you don't override the comfort impulse. Every time you listen to the voice that says not today, you're also creating a neural pathway. You're teaching your brain that this discomfort is indeed something to avoid, that the resistance is a reliable guide to action. You're strengthening the neural connection between the intention to act and the decision to retreat. This is why breaking a streak feels so devastating, not just emotionally, but neurologically. You're not just missing one day. You're casting a vote for a pattern you're trying to escape. The brain's comfort-seeking mechanism also explains why we're so susceptible to immediate gratification. Your brain has two systems for evaluating rewards. The limbic system, which responds powerfully to immediate rewards, and the prefrontal cortex, which can conceptualize and value future rewards. When you're deciding between working on your long-term project or scrolling through social media, these systems are in competition. Social media offers immediate, predictable rewards, novelty, social validation, tiny dopamine hits. Your limbic system lights up. Your long-term project offers delayed, uncertain rewards. Eventual accomplishment, skill development, identity growth. Your prefrontal cortex values these, but it's fighting an uphill battle against the immediate neurological response to the instant option. This isn't a fair fight. The limbic system is older, faster, and more powerful. It operates automatically, beneath conscious awareness. The prefrontal cortex is newer, slower, and easily depleted. This is why discipline is hard in the moment but valuable over time. You're asking your slow, deliberate system to override your fast, automatic one. But here's the strategic insight: you don't have to win this fight through willpower alone. You can change the equation by manipulating the variables. You can make the discipline choice easier and the undisciplined choice harder. You can reduce the immediacy of temptation and increase the salience of long-term value. You can work with your brain's architecture rather than against it. Micro-commitments and lowering resistance. If your brain's primary objection to discipline is the perceived cost, the effort, the discomfort, the uncertainty, then the solution is elegant: lower the cost. Not permanently, but strategically, especially at the beginning when neural pathways are still being formed and resistance is highest. This is where micro-commitments become transformative. A micro-commitment is the smallest possible version of your intended behavior. It's so small that your resistance mechanism doesn't even activate. It's so easy that you can't talk yourself out of it. Want to start a meditation practice? Don't commit to 20 minutes of meditation. Commit to taking one conscious breath. Want to start writing? Don't commit to writing 1,000 words. Commit to writing one sentence. Want to start exercising? Don't commit to a full workout. Commit to putting on your exercise clothes. This might sound trivial. You might think, one breath isn't meditation. One sentence isn't writing. Putting on workout clothes isn't exercise. And you'd be right, except you're missing the psychological mechanism at play. The goal of a micro-commitment isn't the behavior itself. The goal is to cross the threshold of resistance. There's a phenomenon in physics called static friction. The force required to get an object moving from a stationary position is greater than the force required to keep it moving. The same principle applies to human behavior. Starting is the hardest part. Once you've started, continuation is easier. Your brain's resistance is highest before you begin and drops dramatically once you're in motion. When you commit to one conscious breath, you're not committing to one breath. You're committing to sitting down in your meditation space, closing your eyes, and beginning the practice. And here's what happens psychologically. Once you've taken that one breath, the cost of taking a second breath is minimal. You're already there. You're already in the practice. The threshold has been crossed. More often than not, one breath becomes 2, becomes 5, becomes a full session. But even when it doesn't, even when you genuinely stop after one breath, you've accomplished something crucial. You've maintained the pattern. You've cast a vote for your meditator identity. You've kept the neural pathway active. The same mechanism applies to writing. Committing to one sentence gets you to your writing space, gets your document open, gets your fingers on the keyboard. The resistance was to starting, not to continuing. Once the first sentence is written, the second comes more easily. The threshold has been crossed. And even on the rare days when you truly write just one sentence, you've protected the pattern. You've shown up. You've maintained the streak. This strategy is sometimes called the 2-minute rule, popularized by productivity expert David Allen. Any habit should be reduced to a version that takes 2 minutes or less. But the principle goes deeper than time. It's about lowering the activation energy required to begin. It's about making the start so frictionless that your brain's cost-benefit analysis tips in favor of action. Let me give you a personal example. I wanted to establish a daily reading habit, but I kept failing. I'd set ambitious goals: read for an hour, finish a book a week, and then I'd skip days because an hour felt like too much commitment when I was tired or busy. Then I shifted my commitment: read 1 page. That's it. 1 page, every day, no matter what. The fascinating thing is that I almost never read just 1 page. Once I'm reading, I continue. But on the truly exhausting days, the days when life has drained every reserve, I do read just 1 page. And that single page matters enormously. It maintains the pattern. It keeps the identity active. It ensures that reading remains a daily practice rather than an occasional activity. This approach also addresses a subtle psychological trap, the all-or-nothing mindset. When you commit to an hour of meditation or a full workout or 1,000 words, you create a binary condition. Either you do the full amount, or you failed. And when you believe you're going to fail, when you know you don't have a full hour or full energy, you don't start at all. Why begin something you can't complete? Micro-commitments eliminate this trap. There's no failure mode. You can always take 1 breath, write 1 sentence, read 1 page. The commitment is so small that "I don't have time" or "I'm too tired" cease to be valid excuses. Your brain can't find reasonable objections. The resistance has nowhere to attach. But there's an important nuance here: micro-commitments aren't about lowering your standards permanently. They're a strategic tool for crossing the threshold of resistance, especially when you're building a new habit or when life circumstances make your normal practice difficult. Once the behavior becomes more automatic, once the neural pathway is well established, your natural momentum will carry you beyond the micro-commitment. Think of micro-commitments as the ramp that helps you over the wall of resistance. Once you're over the wall, you don't need the ramp anymore. You're already on the other side. But the ramp remains available for the days when the wall seems particularly high, when circumstances are challenging, when your energy or time is limited. Another powerful aspect of micro-commitments is that they shift your focus from outcome to process. When you commit to writing 1,000 words, you're focused on the outcome: did I reach 1,000 words? When you commit to writing 1 sentence, you're focused on the process: did I show up and write? This subtle shift is psychologically significant. Outcomes are often outside your control. You can't control whether inspiration strikes, whether the words flow, whether you have a productive session. But process is entirely within your control. You can always show up. You can always begin. And when your measure of success is showing up rather than achieving a specific outcome, you succeed far more often. You build confidence. You reinforce your identity. You maintain consistency. There's also something profound about lowering resistance from the environmental side. If you want to meditate daily, create a meditation space that requires zero setup. If you want to exercise, lay out your workout clothes the night before. If you want to write, have your writing space permanently ready, document open, minimizing the steps between intention and action. Every point of friction, every small obstacle between you and your intended behavior, gives your brain's resistance mechanism an opportunity to intervene. Eliminating these friction points doesn't just save time. It removes decision points. It reduces the cognitive load of starting. It makes the discipline choice the path of least resistance. James Clear calls this environment design, making the cues of good habits obvious and the cues of bad habits invisible. If your guitar is visible and within easy reach, you're more likely to play it. If it's in a case in the closet, you're less likely. The behavior hasn't changed, the friction has. This principle extends to every area of discipline. Want to eat healthier? Make healthy food more visible and accessible than unhealthy food. Want to reduce phone usage? Make your phone harder to access. Want to read more? Place a book on your pillow so you have to move it before going to bed. These environmental manipulations work with your brain's architecture rather than against it. The beautiful thing about micro-commitments combined with environmental design is that they make discipline feel less like a battle and more like a natural response to your environment and commitments. You're not relying on motivation or willpower resources that fluctuate and deplete. You're creating conditions where the discipline choice becomes the easy choice. Identity-based discipline. Now we arrive at perhaps the most transformative concept in the psychology of daily discipline: the relationship between behavior and identity. Most people approach discipline backward. They focus on what they want to achieve, the outcome, or what they want to do, the process. But the most sustainable form of discipline is rooted in who you want to become, the identity. Consider 3 people trying to quit smoking. Person A focuses on the outcome: I want to save money and improve my health. Person B focuses on the process: I won't smoke today. Person C focuses on identity: I'm not a smoker. Research shows that person C has the highest likelihood of success. Why? Because behavior that's inconsistent with your identity creates psychological discomfort, cognitive dissonance, that your brain works to resolve. If you believe you're not a smoker, smoking feels wrong. It creates internal friction. Your brain wants to behave in ways that confirm your self-concept. This is identity-based discipline. Building your daily practices around becoming a certain type of person rather than achieving a certain outcome. Instead of I want to run a marathon, it's I am a runner. Instead of I want to write a book, it's I am a writer. Instead of I want to be healthy, it's I am someone who takes care of their body. The shift seems subtle, but the psychological implications are profound. When you identify as a runner, you don't need to convince yourself to run. Running is what runners do. When you identify as a writer, you don't negotiate about whether to write today. Writers write. The behavior flows naturally from the identity. But here's the key question: how do you adopt a new identity without feeling like an imposter? If you've never run before, can you really call yourself a runner? If you've never published anything, are you really a writer? This is where most people get stuck. They wait to deserve the identity before claiming it. They think they need to achieve something significant before they can own the label. But identity doesn't work that way. You don't discover your identity, you create it through your actions. Every behavior is a vote for the type of person you believe you are. Run once, you've cast 1 vote for your runner identity. Run 3 times, you've cast 3 votes. After enough votes, the identity becomes self-evident. You believe it because you have evidence. Your brain has observed a pattern and drawn a conclusion: I'm someone who runs. The key is to start with small, believable votes. You don't need to run a marathon to be a runner. You just need to run. You don't need to publish a bestseller to be a writer. You just need to write. The identity isn't earned through achievement, it's built through repetition. This is why micro-commitments are so powerful when combined with identity thinking. Every time you honor your micro-commitment, you're casting a vote. 1 page read, 1 vote for reader. 1 sentence written, 1 vote for writer. 1 workout completed, 1 vote for athlete. The votes accumulate. The identity solidifies. There's a fascinating study from the field of social psychology that illustrates this principle. Researchers asked people to perform a small action consistent with a certain identity, for example, wearing a button supporting environmental causes. Later, those same people were significantly more likely to engage in larger, more costly environmental behaviors, like donating money or volunteering time. Why? Because the small action had updated their self-concept. They now saw themselves as people who care about the environment, and their subsequent behaviors aligned with that identity. You can leverage this mechanism deliberately. Want to become more disciplined? Start with 1 tiny act of discipline daily. Want to become more creative? Engage in 1 small creative act. Want to become more social? Initiate 1 brief social interaction. Each small action casts a vote, and votes accumulate into identity. But here's where many people sabotage themselves. They violate their new identity in small ways and tell themselves it doesn't matter. I'm a healthy person, but 1 donut won't hurt. I'm a writer, but I can skip today. These violations aren't catastrophic because of the action itself. They're significant because they're votes against your identity. You're casting votes for the person you're trying to stop being. This doesn't mean perfection is required. Missing occasionally is inevitable and human. But what you do after the miss is crucial. Do you treat it as evidence that you're not really that person? Or do you treat it as an anomaly, return to the pattern, and let your accumulated votes speak louder than the occasional deviation? Imagine your identity as a courtroom verdict based on evidence. 1 piece of contrary evidence doesn't overturn the case if you have overwhelming support. 1 missed workout doesn't mean you're not athletic if you have weeks of consistent workouts. 1 skipped writing session doesn't mean you're not a writer if you've been showing up regularly. The pattern matters more than the individual instance. This is also why getting back on track immediately after a deviation is so psychologically important. It's not about the 1 workout you missed, it's about whether missing becomes a pattern. If you miss Monday and return Tuesday, Monday was an anomaly. If you miss Monday, skip Tuesday, and avoid Wednesday, you're casting multiple votes for the old identity. You're creating a new pattern of not showing up. Identity-based discipline also helps you navigate decision points throughout your day. When faced with a choice, should I exercise or watch TV, write or scroll, meditate or sleep in, you can ask yourself, what would your desired identity do in this situation? What would a healthy person choose? What would a disciplined person do? What would a creative person prioritize? This question shifts the decision from what do I feel like doing to who am I becoming? The first question is answered by your comfort-seeking limbic system. The second is answered by your values and your aspirational identity. It elevates the decision from impulse to intention. There's also deep wisdom in focusing on identity rather than outcomes because identity is something you can embody right now, regardless of external results. You can be a runner today, even if you're slow. You can be a writer today, even if you're unpublished. You can be an entrepreneur today, even if your business hasn't succeeded yet. The identity isn't contingent on achievement, it's proven through behavior. This is liberating because it removes the waiting period. You don't have to delay becoming who you want to be until some future milestone. You can become that person today, right now, through your next action. And that person, once embodied, makes the disciplined choice natural rather than forced. Let me leave you with this powerful realization: every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. No vote is insignificant. Each one matters. You wouldn't skip voting in an important election because you thought one vote didn't matter. Don't skip casting votes for your identity for the same reason. The election for who you become is happening right now, and you're the only voter. Choose wisely. Vote consistently. And watch as the person you've been voting for emerges from the accumulated evidence of your daily discipline. Retrain can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Chapter 2: Training your brain for follow-through. Neural pathways and repetition. Imagine holding a ball of clay in your hands. Fresh from the package, it's stiff and resistant. But as you work it, pressing, kneading, warming it with your palms, it becomes pliable. It takes the shape you give it. Your brain is remarkably similar, except the shaping force isn't heat or pressure, it's repetition. Every thought you think, every action you take, every pattern you repeat is physically changing the structure of your brain. This isn't metaphor. It's neuroscience. When you perform an action, electrical signals travel along specific neural pathways, chains of neurons connected by synapses. The first time you perform a new action, you're forging a new pathway through previously unconnected terrain. It's effortful. It requires conscious attention. Your prefrontal cortex is doing heavy lifting, manually directing the process. But something remarkable happens when you repeat that action. The neural pathway you just created gets reinforced. The synaptic connections strengthen. The myelin sheath, a fatty insulation that wraps around nerve fibers, thickens, allowing signals to travel faster and more efficiently. What required deliberate effort yesterday requires slightly less today. What felt awkward last week feels more natural this week. You're not just performing an action repeatedly. You're literally rewiring your brain to make that action easier. Neuroscientists have a phrase for this: neurons that fire together wire together. It's called Hebbian learning, named after psychologist Donald Hebb, who first described this mechanism in 1949. When two neurons are activated simultaneously and repeatedly, the connection between them strengthens. The pathway becomes more established, more automatic, more efficient. This is why repetition is the foundation of follow-through. You're not building willpower, that's a finite resource that depletes. You're building automation. You're transferring behaviors from the energy-intensive prefrontal cortex to the energy-efficient basal ganglia, the part of your brain that handles automatic processes and habits. Once a behavior reaches this level of automation, it requires minimal conscious effort. It becomes something you do, not something you decide to do. Think about driving a car. Remember your first time behind the wheel? Every action required conscious thought. Check mirrors. Adjust steering. Monitor speed. Watch for traffic. It was overwhelming, exhausting, almost impossible to imagine doing all these things simultaneously while also navigating and conversing. But through repetition, these actions became automatic. Now you can drive while listening to a podcast, planning your day, or having a deep conversation. The behaviors have been encoded into automatic neural pathways. The same process applies to any repeated behavior. The first time you sit down to write, every aspect requires conscious effort. Opening the document, summoning ideas, forming sentences, resisting distractions. But after 100 sessions, many of these elements become automatic. You sit in your writing chair, your brain recognizes the context, and the writing state becomes easier to access. The neural pathway has been established. Here's what makes this process both encouraging and demanding: the brain doesn't distinguish between good and bad pathways. It simply strengthens whatever you repeat. If you repeatedly check your phone when you feel bored, you're building a neural pathway between the feeling of boredom and the action of reaching for your phone. If you repeatedly hit snooze when your alarm goes off, you're building a pathway between the alarm sound and the action of delaying. Your brain is exquisitely efficient at automating patterns, whatever patterns you give it. This is why breaking bad habits is so challenging. You're not just trying to stop a behavior. You're fighting against an established neural pathway, a physical structure in your brain that has been reinforced through thousands of repetitions. The pathway doesn't disappear just because you've decided to change. It remains, like a well-worn trail through a forest, ready to be reactivated. But here's the strategic insight: you don't have to erase old pathways, you just have to build stronger new ones. When you repeatedly choose a different response to the same trigger, you're creating an alternative neural pathway. Initially, the old pathway is still stronger. The old behavior feels more natural, more automatic. Your brain defaults to it. But with each repetition of the new behavior, the new pathway strengthens while the old one, no longer being used, gradually weakens through a process called synaptic pruning. Think of it like this: you live in a house with two doors. For years, you've used the front door exclusively. It's the automatic choice. You don't think about it, you just use that door. Now you decide to start using the side door instead. The first few times, you'll still walk toward the front door before catching yourself. The old pathway is strong. But each time you consciously choose the side door, you're weakening the front door pathway and strengthening the side door pathway. Eventually, the side door becomes the automatic choice. The neural pathway has shifted. This process takes time. Neuroscientists estimate that it takes anywhere from 18 to 254 days for a new behavior to become automatic, with an average around 66 days. The wide range reflects the complexity of different behaviors and individual differences. A simple behavior like drinking water when you wake up becomes automatic faster than a complex behavior like a full workout routine. But the principle remains: consistency over time leads to automation. Understanding this timeline is psychologically crucial. Many people quit after 2 weeks because the behavior still feels hard, still requires effort, still demands conscious willpower. They assume it will always feel this hard. But they're giving up just as the neural pathway is beginning to form, just as the myelin is starting to thicken, just as the automation process is initiating. They're stopping 3 feet from gold. The brain's plasticity also means that repetition matters more than duration. 10 minutes of practice daily creates stronger neural pathways than 70 minutes of practice once a week. The daily repetition signals to your brain that this is an important pattern worth automating. The weekly practice, no matter how intensive, doesn't provide the consistent signal needed for deep encoding. This is why your micro-commitment of 1 sentence written daily is neurologically more powerful than a commitment to write for 3 hours on Sunday. There's also a fascinating aspect of neural pathway formation related to context. Your brain doesn't just encode the action, it encodes the entire context surrounding the action. The time of day, the location, the preceding behaviors, even your emotional state become part of the neural pattern. This is why establishing a consistent context for your habits is so powerful. If you always write in the same location at the same time after the same preceding activity, say, at your desk at 6 a.m. after making coffee, your brain begins to associate all these contextual elements with the writing behavior. Eventually, sitting at your desk at 6 a.m. with coffee becomes a trigger that automatically initiates the writing state. The context itself activates the neural pathway. You're not just building a habit, you're building a conditioned response. This also explains why habits often fall apart when your environment changes dramatically: moving to a new house, starting a new job, going on vacation. The contextual triggers that activated your automatic behaviors are suddenly absent. You have to rebuild the neural pathways in the new context. This isn't failure, it's neurology. Understanding this allows you to be strategic. When your environment changes, expect your habits to require conscious effort again. You're re-establishing pathways in a new context. How to remove friction from habits. If neural pathways are strengthened through repetition, then anything that prevents repetition is your enemy. This is where friction becomes the central concept. Friction is any obstacle, physical, cognitive, or emotional, that exists between your intention and your action. Every point of friction is an opportunity for your comfort-seeking brain to intervene and redirect you toward easier alternatives. Let's make this concrete. You've decided to exercise every morning. You wake up, and immediately you face decision points. What should I wear? Where are my shoes? What workout will I do? Should I eat first? Each decision point is friction. Each one requires cognitive energy. Each one gives your brain's resistance mechanism an opportunity to suggest an alternative. This is complicated. Let's just skip today. We'll do it tomorrow when we're more prepared. Now imagine a different scenario. You wake up, and your workout clothes are already laid out beside your bed. Your shoes are right there. Your workout plan is written on a card next to your clothes. You've prepared a pre-workout snack the night before. You've eliminated the decision points. The path from waking up to working out is frictionless. Your brain has no reasonable objections. The behavior flows naturally from the intention. This is the art of removing friction, identifying every obstacle between intention and action, then systematically eliminating or minimizing those obstacles. It's environment design, strategic planning, and psychological insight combined. And it's one of the most powerful tools for building consistency because it works with your brain's architecture rather than against it. James Clear describes this as making good habits inevitable and bad habits impossible. If you want to eat healthier, don't rely on willpower when you're hungry and standing in front of the fridge. Design your environment so healthy food is visible, accessible, and prepared, while unhealthy food requires effort to access. If you want to reduce phone usage, don't fight the urge to check it constantly. Put your phone in another room, turn off notifications, delete tempting apps. Change the friction. The principle works in both directions. You can reduce friction for behaviors you want to increase and add friction for behaviors you want to decrease. Want to read more? Place books throughout your house where you naturally sit. Want to watch less TV? Unplug it after each use, store the remote in another room, make it slightly annoying to start. The small friction points you add to undesired behaviors create just enough resistance that your autopilot brain often doesn't bother engaging them. Let me give you a personal example of friction removal. I wanted to establish a morning meditation practice, but I kept failing. I'd wake up with the intention to meditate, but then I'd think about where to sit, whether to use my meditation app, how long to set the timer for, whether I should meditate before or after coffee. These tiny decision points created enough friction that I'd often skip the meditation entirely and jump straight into my day. Then I redesigned the process. I created a dedicated meditation corner with a cushion permanently in place. I left my phone there overnight with the meditation app already open to my preferred session. I made a rule: before doing anything else, I sit on that cushion. The app is already there. The session is already selected. I just press play. I removed every decision point, every friction source. My meditation practice went from inconsistent to daily, not because my motivation increased, but because the friction decreased. This principle extends to every behavior. Want to write daily? Have your writing space permanently ready, document open, minimizing the steps between sitting down and writing. Want to practice an instrument? Keep the instrument visible and accessible, not in a case in the closet. Want to take vitamins daily? Place them next to your coffee maker or toothbrush, somewhere you already go daily, creating a visual trigger and eliminating the need to remember. There's a concept called decision fatigue that makes friction removal even more critical. Every decision you make throughout the day depletes your cognitive resources. By evening, your capacity for making good decisions is diminished. This is why behaviors scheduled for evening often fail more frequently than morning behaviors. You've spent all day making decisions, and by evening, your brain is looking for the path of least resistance. Removing friction counteracts decision fatigue. When you pre-decide and pre-prepare, you're making the decision when your cognitive resources are full. Then, in the moment when you need to act, there's no decision to make. You're simply following the frictionless path you've created. Another powerful strategy is habit stacking. Instead of building a new habit in isolation, you attach it to an existing habit that's already automatic. The formula is simple: after I, existing habit, I will, new habit. The existing habit becomes a trigger for the new one, and because it's already automatic, you're removing the friction of remembering and initiating the new behavior. Examples: after I pour my morning coffee, I will write in my journal for 2 minutes. After I close my laptop at the end of the workday, I will do 10 push-ups. After I brush my teeth at night, I will lay out my exercise clothes for tomorrow. The existing habit is the friction-free trigger. System building instead of motivation chasing. Let's confront an uncomfortable truth: motivation is unreliable. It's emotional weather, sometimes sunny, often cloudy, occasionally stormy, impossible to control. If you're waiting to feel motivated before you act, you've already lost. You've handed control of your behavior to your fluctuating emotional state, governed by factors outside your awareness: sleep quality, blood sugar, stress levels, hormonal cycles. The people you admire for their consistency aren't more motivated than everyone else. They've just stopped relying on motivation. They've built systems that produce results regardless of how they feel. What's a system? A system is a repeatable process that reliably produces a desired outcome. It's the difference between hoping to exercise and having a specific workout scheduled at a specific time and a specific place with specific preparation steps. It's the difference between wanting to write and having a daily writing ritual with environmental cues and minimized distractions. Systems remove the need for motivation by removing the need for decision-making. When you have a system, you're not asking yourself, "Should I do this today?" You're simply following the process. The system decides for you. Your job is just to engage the system. Think of systems like recipes. A recipe doesn't require culinary genius or inspiration. It just requires following the steps. Gather ingredients. Combine them in order. Cook at this temperature for this duration. The recipe reliably produces a dish, regardless of your mood. You're building behavioral recipes. Let's build a concrete example. Say you want to write daily. A motivation-based approach. I'll write whenever I feel inspired. This produces sporadic results because you're dependent on inspiration appearing. A system-based approach: every weekday at 6 a.m., I sit at my desk with my phone in another room, open my writing document, and write for 25 minutes. I've prepared my space the night before. I've identified my topic during Sunday planning. After 25 minutes, regardless of output, I close the document and move on. Weekends are recovery time. Notice the difference? The system includes timing, location, duration, preparation, distraction management, and recovery. There's no decision-making required in the moment. You follow the protocol. Some days the writing flows. Many days it won't. But the system doesn't care about quality, it cares about consistency. Systems also build in protection against failure. What if you miss a day? The system says, return to the process the next day. No guilt, just resume. What if you're traveling? The system includes a modified version, perhaps 10 minutes instead of 25. The system adapts while maintaining the core pattern. Habit tracking is a powerful system component. A simple calendar where you mark off each day you complete your behavior provides visual feedback, activates your reward system, and creates motivation through loss aversion. Once you have a streak, you don't want to break it. The tracking provides data for optimization. You can see patterns in when you succeed and struggle. But the goal isn't perfectionism. It's awareness. You're not trying to never miss, that's unrealistic. You're maintaining the pattern, where missing is the exception. James Clear suggests the 2-day rule: never miss twice in a row. Missing once is an anomaly. Missing twice is the beginning of a new pattern. Systems incorporate implementation intentions, specific plans spelling out when, where, and how you'll perform a behavior. Instead of "I'll exercise more," it's "if it's Monday, Wednesday, or Friday at 7 a.m., then I will put on my workout clothes and do routine A in my living room." The if-then structure creates a mental link between situational cue and behavioral response. When the cue occurs, the behavior triggers automatically. Studies show implementation intentions increase follow-through by as much as 300% because they transfer the decision from the moment of action to the moment of planning. Systems should include accountability mechanisms. This might be a workout partner, a writing group, a coach, or a public commitment. Accountability shifts the cost-benefit calculation. Skipping no longer just disappoints you, it affects others. Systems also recognize different behaviors require different energy levels. High cognitive tasks should be scheduled when cognitive resources are fullest, typically morning. Lower stakes behaviors can be scheduled for lower energy times. You're working with your natural patterns rather than against them. The most sophisticated systems include regular review periods. Weekly or monthly, examine your system's performance. What's working? What's not? Where are you struggling? What needs adjustment? Maybe evening workouts work better than morning ones. Adjust the system. Maybe 35 minutes feels better than 25. Adjust. Your system evolves based on experience. Here's the realization. Systems give you freedom, not constraint. When you're relying on motivation, you're a slave to feelings. When you have a system, you're free from constant internal negotiation. The decision is made. The process is established. You engage the system, and it delivers results. The person without a system is perpetually starting over, perpetually dependent on willpower, perpetually at the mercy of emotional state. The person with a system is accumulating results, building momentum, making progress even on difficult days. The system becomes your infrastructure for inevitable success. So stop chasing motivation. Stop waiting to feel ready. Start building systems. Design your environment. Create implementation intentions. Establish accountability. Schedule strategically. Track consistency. Review and optimize. Build the infrastructure that makes follow-through automatic. Because discipline isn't about willpower. It's about systems. And systems don't fail when motivation fades, they keep producing results, day after day, regardless of how you feel. That's the power of training your brain through systems. That's how you transform from someone who occasionally follows through to someone who consistently delivers. Chapter 3. Eliminating distraction and strengthening focus. The role of environment. Your environment is not neutral. It's not simply the backdrop against which your life unfolds. Your environment is an active participant in every decision you make, every behavior you engage in, every thought you think. It's constantly whispering suggestions, triggering impulses, shaping possibilities. And most of this influence happens beneath your conscious awareness, in the automatic, pattern recognition systems of your brain. Think about the last time you walked into a bakery. Before you consciously decided anything, your mouth was already watering. The smell triggered an automatic response. You didn't choose to feel hungry, the environment made the choice for you. Or consider walking into a library. Without anyone telling you, you lower your voice. The environment communicates behavioral expectations, and you comply automatically. This is the invisible power of environmental influence. Now apply this understanding to your daily life. If your phone sits on your desk while you're trying to work, it's not just an inert object. It's a constant trigger, a perpetual suggestion, check me. Something might be there. Something new, something interesting, something urgent. Your conscious mind might be focused on your work, but your subconscious is expending energy resisting that trigger. You're fighting your environment, and that fight is exhausting. The strategic insight is this: you can architect your environment to support the behaviors you want and discourage the behaviors you're trying to avoid. You can make distraction difficult and focus easy. You can remove the triggers that derail you and install the cues that guide you toward your intentions. This isn't willpower. This is design. Let's start with the most obvious environmental intervention: removing temptation from your physical space. If you're trying to focus on writing, your phone shouldn't be in the room. Not on silent. Not face down. Not in your pocket. In another room entirely. The mere presence of your phone, even when you're not using it, reduces your cognitive capacity. There's a fascinating study from the University of Texas that demonstrated this. Participants performed cognitive tasks with their phones either on the desk, in their pocket, or in another room. Even when the phones were off, having them nearby reduced available cognitive capacity. The brain was subconsciously monitoring the phone, wondering if something important might be happening, maintaining readiness to check. That monitoring consumed resources that could have been directed toward the task. This principle extends to every distraction source in your environment. Trying to eat healthier? Don't keep junk food in your house and rely on willpower to resist it. Remove it entirely. The moment of temptation, when you're tired, stressed, or hungry, is not when you want to fight that battle. You want to have already won by making the temptation unavailable. Trying to reduce social media usage? Delete the apps from your phone. Make accessing them require deliberate effort, opening a browser, typing a URL, logging in. That friction is often enough to break the automatic behavior pattern. But environment design isn't just about removal. It's also about intentional placement. What do you want to do more of? Make it visible, accessible, easy. Want to read more? Place books everywhere you naturally sit, beside your bed, on your coffee table, in your bathroom. You'll read more not because your desire to read increased, but because books are constantly present, constantly available, constantly suggesting themselves. Want to exercise? Keep your workout equipment visible. If your yoga mat is rolled up in the closet, you have to make a decision to get it out. If it's already spread on the floor in a designated space, you just have to step onto it. The concept of environmental friction is crucial here. Every step between you and a behavior is a decision point where you might abandon the behavior. If playing guitar requires getting it out of a case, tuning it, finding a pick, and deciding what to play, each step is an opportunity to give up. If the guitar is on a stand, in tune, with a pick right there and a practice routine on the wall beside it, the path from intention to action is frictionless. Your physical workspace is perhaps the most critical environment to optimize. The human brain has limited attentional resources. When you're working in a cluttered, chaotic space, your brain is constantly processing all the visual stimuli around you. That half-finished project in your peripheral vision, those papers scattered across your desk, that stack of books you've been meaning to read, each item is subtly pulling at your attention. You might think you're ignoring them, but your brain is still processing them, still categorizing them, still maintaining awareness of them. That's cognitive load you could be directing toward your actual work. A clean, organized, minimalist workspace isn't about aesthetics, it's about cognitive efficiency. When there's nothing in your environment except what's relevant to your current task, your brain can direct all its attentional resources toward that task. This is why many highly productive people maintain almost empty desks. Not because they're obsessive about tidiness, but because they understand that every object in their visual field is competing for cognitive resources. There's also the temporal dimension of environment. Your environment changes throughout the day, and different environments support different types of work. Morning light supports alertness and focus. Evening dim light supports winding down and recovery. Temperature affects cognition. Slightly cool environments tend to enhance alertness. Sound environments matter enormously. Some people focus best in silence. Others need ambient noise to mask more distracting sounds. Still others find that specific types of music, often instrumental, often familiar, help them enter flow states. You can deliberately create different environmental contexts for different types of work. Perhaps you write in one location, edit in another, and handle administrative tasks in a third. Each location becomes associated with a specific type of cognitive state. Your brain learns the pattern: when I'm in this chair, facing this direction, at this desk, I write. When I move to the couch with my laptop, I edit. The location itself becomes a trigger for the appropriate mental state. Coffee shops are interesting examples of environmental engineering. Many people find they can focus better in coffee shops than at home, even though coffee shops are objectively more distracting, more noise, more movement, more unpredictability. Why? Because at home, you're surrounded by environmental cues for every other behavior in your life. The couch suggests relaxing, the kitchen suggests eating, the bedroom suggests sleeping, the TV suggests entertainment. Each cue creates a subtle pull away from focused work. At a coffee shop, none of those competing cues exist. You're in a neutral space with only your work and your intention. The environmental suggestions all point in the same direction: sit, drink coffee, work on your laptop. That's what everyone else is doing. The environment supports the behavior. You can recreate this principle at home by designating specific spaces for specific activities. Your desk is only for focused work. Never for leisure browsing, never for watching videos, never for anything except the behaviors you want to reinforce. Your reading chair is only for reading. Your meditation cushion is only for meditating. You're training your brain to associate specific environments with specific behaviors, and over time, entering those environments automatically initiates the associated mental states. Dopamine management. To understand distraction, you need to understand dopamine. Not the popular misconception of dopamine as a pleasure chemical, but what it actually does. Dopamine is the neurochemical of anticipation, motivation, and reward seeking. It's what makes you want to check your phone, scroll through social media, open the refrigerator, refresh your email. It's driving the seeking behavior, not the satisfaction you feel when you find something. Here's the crucial mechanism: your brain releases dopamine in response to unpredictable rewards. When you check your phone, sometimes there's a message, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's not. This unpredictability creates what psychologists call a variable reward schedule, the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. You keep checking because you might find something good, and that possibility triggers dopamine release. The anticipation itself becomes rewarding, independent of what you actually find. This is why social media is so captivating. Every scroll might reveal something interesting: a funny post, breaking news, a message from a friend, validation in the form of likes. The unpredictability keeps your dopamine system engaged. You're not scrolling because you're finding amazing content with every swipe, you're scrolling because you might find it. The behavior is driven by possibility, not by actual reward. Now contrast this with focused work. Writing a paragraph, solving a problem, reading a chapter. These activities provide delayed and predictable rewards. The dopamine system isn't activated in the same immediate, variable way. You know roughly what you'll get: a completed paragraph, a solved problem, absorbed information. It's valuable, but it's not triggering that same anticipatory dopamine response. This is why your brain preferentially gravitates toward checking your phone over doing focused work. It's not weakness. It's neurochemistry. Understanding this mechanism allows you to manage it strategically. First, recognize that you're not fighting a personal weakness, you're fighting dopamine. Modern technology companies have invested billions in optimizing their products to trigger dopamine responses. Your phone isn't just a tool, it's a carefully engineered dopamine delivery device. You're not going to win this fight through willpower alone. You need to change the equation. The most effective strategy is to reduce your baseline dopamine activation throughout the day. When you're constantly hitting your dopamine system with small hits, checking your phone, scrolling social media, grazing on snacks, jumping between tasks, you're keeping your dopamine levels artificially elevated. This creates two problems. First, you build tolerance. The same stimuli produce less dopamine response, so you need more frequent or more intense stimulation to get the same effect. Second, activities with lower dopamine activation, like focused work, feel increasingly unrewarding by comparison. You've trained your brain to expect constant stimulation, and anything less feels boring. The solution is dopamine detox, not the extreme version where you sit in a dark room doing nothing, but a strategic reduction in high dopamine behaviors. This might mean no phone for the first hour after waking. No social media before completing your priority task for the day. No background music or podcasts during focused work. No snacking between meals. You're deliberately lowering your baseline dopamine activation. What happens after several days of reduced dopamine stimulation? Activities that previously felt boring, reading, writing, problem solving, having conversations, become more engaging. You haven't changed the activities. You've changed your dopamine baseline. When your brain isn't constantly flooded with high dopamine stimuli, it can appreciate and engage with lower intensity rewards. That book you couldn't focus on becomes interesting. That work task you kept avoiding becomes tolerable, even engaging. You've reset your reward sensitivity. There's also strategic timing of high dopamine activities. If you check your phone and scroll social media first thing in the morning, you've immediately elevated your dopamine baseline for the day. Everything else will feel less rewarding by comparison. But if you complete your focused work first, while your dopamine system is fresh and your brain hasn't been conditioned to expect constant stimulation, the work is easier. You can use high dopamine activities as rewards after completing low dopamine but high value activities. This creates an internal reinforcement loop. Focused work leads to dopamine reward, strengthening the association between work and reward. Understanding dopamine also explains why breaking tasks into smaller chunks with clear completion points enhances focus. Each completed chunk provides a small dopamine hit, the satisfaction of completion, progress toward a goal, a visible checkmark on your list. You're creating more frequent reward moments within the work itself, making the work more dopaminergically engaging. This is why the Pomodoro technique is so effective. It's not just about time management. It's about creating dopamine release every 25 minutes when the timer goes off and you take a break. That completion signal triggers satisfaction, which reinforces the behavior of focusing for another session. Another powerful intervention is creating friction between you and high dopamine distractions. Every second of delay between impulse and action gives your prefrontal cortex an opportunity to intervene. If checking social media requires getting your phone from another room, unlocking it, opening a browser, typing a URL, and logging in, that 30-second process is often enough for the impulse to fade. You become aware of what you're doing, and awareness creates choice. You might still check social media, but it's now a conscious decision rather than an automatic response to a dopamine impulse. You can also gamify focused work to make it more dopaminergically engaging. Time yourself. Try to beat your previous record for focused minutes. Create visible progress tracking. Use apps that grow virtual trees while you focus and kill them if you leave the app. These are artificial dopamine triggers, but they're aligned with your goals rather than opposed to them. You're hacking your dopamine system to support focused behavior. The attention threshold and how to expand it. Your attention has a threshold. A duration you can maintain focus before your mind begins to wander, before discomfort sets in, before the pull of distraction becomes overwhelming. For most people in the modern world, this threshold is alarmingly short. Studies suggest the average person can focus on a single task for about 40 seconds before checking something else, switching tasks, or mentally disengaging. 40 seconds. Less than a minute of sustained attention before the brain seeks something new. This isn't your fault. This is adaptation. Your brain has been trained by your environment. If you've spent years responding to notifications, switching between apps, scrolling through feeds, consuming bite-sized content, your brain has learned to expect constant novelty. It's adapted to a state of continuous partial attention, never fully focused on anything, always monitoring for something more interesting, more urgent, more stimulating. Your attention threshold has been compressed. But here's the empowering truth. Your attention threshold is trainable. Just as you can build muscular endurance through progressive training, you can build attentional endurance. You can expand your capacity for sustained focus. It requires deliberate practice, but the mechanism is straightforward. You regularly push slightly beyond your current threshold, and over time, that threshold expands. Start by measuring your current attention threshold honestly. Set a timer and work on a single task. Writing, reading, problem solving with full focus. No phone, no email, no switching tasks. How long can you maintain genuine focus before your mind wanders, before you feel the urge to check something, before discomfort makes you want to break? For many people, it's between 5 and 15 minutes initially. That's your starting point. Not a judgment. Just data. Now begin training. Tomorrow, work for that duration plus 2 minutes. If you can focus for 10 minutes today, aim for 12 tomorrow. The additional 2 minutes will feel uncomfortable. You'll notice resistance. Your brain will suggest checking your phone, switching tasks, taking a break. This discomfort is the training stimulus. Just as lifting slightly more weight creates the stress that builds muscle, pushing slightly beyond your attention threshold creates the conditions for expanding that threshold. The key is slightly. If your attention threshold is 10 minutes and you try to focus for an hour, you'll fail, become frustrated, and reinforce the belief that you can't focus. But if you aim for 12 minutes, you'll likely succeed. That success is crucial. You're proving to yourself that your attention capacity can expand. You're building confidence alongside capacity. Over weeks of progressive training, your attention threshold will expand dramatically. What felt like an impossible duration of focus becomes comfortable. Your 15-minute threshold becomes 20, becomes 30, becomes an hour. You haven't fundamentally changed who you are. You've trained a skill through consistent practice. There are specific practices that accelerate this expansion. Meditation is perhaps the most direct form of attention training. When you meditate, you're practicing the skill of noticing when your attention has wandered and gently returning it to your chosen focus: a breath, body sensation, a mantra. Every instance of noticing and returning is a repetition, strengthening your attentional control. Research shows that regular meditation practice literally changes brain structure in regions associated with attention and self-regulation. People who meditate regularly demonstrate measurably longer attention spans and better ability to sustain focus. Deep reading, engaging with long-form text without interruption, is another powerful attention trainer. Reading a book for 30 uninterrupted minutes requires sustaining attention on a single narrative thread, holding context in working memory, resisting the impulse to check your phone or switch activities. It's attention training disguised as leisure. This is why many productivity experts recommend daily reading as a practice, not just for the information gained, but for the attentional discipline developed. Single tasking is the opposite of multitasking, and it's essential for expanding attention. Multitasking is a myth. Your brain doesn't actually process multiple cognitive tasks simultaneously. It rapidly switches between them, and each switch carries a cognitive cost called switching cost. Every time you shift from writing to checking email to writing again, you lose time and mental energy reorienting to the task. Single tasking means one task, one time block, full attention. No switching, no monitoring other things. This practice alone can double or triple your effective focus capacity. There's also the concept of attention anchors. Specific sensory experiences that you associate with focused states. This might be a particular instrumental music playlist, a specific scent in your workspace, a particular seated posture. When you consistently use the same anchor while practicing focused attention, your brain begins to associate that anchor with the focused state. Eventually, engaging the anchor automatically initiates the state. The music starts, and your brain shifts into focus mode. This is classical conditioning applied to attention. You're training in automatic response. Environmental stability supports attention expansion. When your environment is constantly changing, different locations, different times, different contexts, your brain must continuously reorient and adapt. But when you practice focused attention in the same environment at the same time with the same preceding ritual, you're reducing the cognitive load of orientation. Your brain knows what to expect. It can direct more resources towards sustaining attention rather than processing environmental change. Understanding ultradian rhythms enhances attention practice. Your brain naturally cycles through periods of high and low alertness throughout the day, typically in 90-minute cycles. Pushing for extended focus during a low alertness period is inefficient. Instead, align your focused work with your natural high alertness periods. For most people, this is mid to late morning and mid to late afternoon. Schedule your attention-intensive work for these windows, and you're working with your biology rather than against it. Recovery is as important as practice. Your attention is a resource that depletes with use. After a period of intense focus, your brain needs recovery, ideally through genuinely restorative activities that don't require attentional effort. Walking without your phone. Sitting quietly. Lying down with closed eyes. Gentle stretching. Not scrolling, not watching videos, not switching to different cognitive tasks. Genuine rest allows your attentional systems to recover, making subsequent focus periods more effective. The ultimate goal isn't to maintain constant focus indefinitely, that's neither possible nor desirable. The goal is to expand your capacity to focus when you choose to, for the duration you need to. It's about control. When you have a 30-second attention threshold, you don't have control. You're at the mercy of every distraction, every impulse, every notification. When you have a 60-minute attention threshold, you have agency. You can choose to engage in deep work, knowing you have the capacity to sustain it. You can choose to read a complex article, solve a difficult problem, have a meaningful conversation without your attention fragmenting. This capacity, this expanded attention threshold, might be the most valuable skill you can develop in the modern world. In an economy increasingly built on knowledge work, the ability to focus deeply is becoming rare and therefore increasingly valuable. While others fragment their attention across dozens of apps and notifications, you can sustain focus for hours. That differential compounds over time into extraordinary productivity, learning, and creative output. Not because you're smarter or more talented, but because you've trained the fundamental skill that unlocks all others, the ability to direct and sustain your attention on what matters most. Chapter 4: Emotional Management for Consistency. Handling Low Energy Days. Let's begin with a truth that's rarely acknowledged in productivity culture. Some days, you will wake up feeling terrible. Your body will feel heavy. Your mind will feel foggy. The tasks that seemed manageable yesterday will feel insurmountable today. And this is not a failure. This is biology. Your energy is not constant. It fluctuates based on sleep quality, hormonal cycles, stress levels, nutrition, circadian rhythms, accumulated fatigue, and dozens of other variables, many of which are outside your conscious control. Expecting yourself to perform at peak capacity every single day is like expecting the weather to be sunny every day. It's not realistic, and when you measure yourself against that impossible standard, you create unnecessary suffering. The key to maintaining consistency isn't eliminating low energy days, it's developing a strategy for navigating them without abandoning your commitments. This starts with recognition. When you wake up feeling depleted, the first step is acknowledging it without judgment. "I'm having a low energy day" is a neutral observation. "I'm lazy and weak" is a judgment that adds emotional suffering to physical depletion. The first allows for strategic adaptation. The second triggers shame, which further depletes your already limited resources. Once you've recognized you're having a low energy day, the question becomes, what's the minimum viable version of my commitment today? Remember the concept of micro-commitments from earlier chapters. This is where they become essential. On high energy days, you might write for an hour and produce 2,000 words. On low energy days, your micro-commitment is one sentence. You're not abandoning your identity as a writer, you're honoring it within your current capacity. There's profound psychological wisdom in maintaining the pattern even at minimum capacity. When you skip entirely, you're sending yourself a message: my commitments are conditional on feeling good. You're teaching your brain that discomfort is a valid reason to abandon your goals. But when you honor your micro-commitment even on terrible days, you're sending a different message: I keep my promises to myself regardless of how I feel. You're proving that your consistency isn't dependent on your energy level. That proof builds a different kind of strength, not physical strength, but character strength. Low energy days also provide valuable information. If they're occasional and random, they're just normal fluctuation. But if they're frequent or patterned, they're signals that something needs attention. Are you sleeping enough? Is your nutrition adequate? Are you managing stress effectively? Are you building in sufficient recovery? Low energy days aren't just obstacles to push through, they're feedback from your body about the sustainability of your current lifestyle. There's also strategic scheduling that accounts for predictable energy fluctuations. Most people experience higher energy in the morning and lower energy in the afternoon and evening. If you consistently schedule your most important, most demanding tasks for your low energy periods, you're setting yourself up for struggle. Instead, protect your high energy windows for your highest priority work. Schedule administrative tasks, routine activities, and less cognitively demanding work for your low energy periods. You're working with your natural energy patterns rather than against them. Some low energy days are also signs that you need rest, not productivity strategies. The modern world often treats rest as weakness, as something to be minimized and overcome. But rest is not the opposite of productivity, it's the foundation of sustainable productivity. Your body and brain need recovery time to repair, consolidate learning, and restore resources. If you're constantly pushing through low energy days without ever truly resting, you're not building resilience, you're accumulating fatigue that will eventually force you to stop, often at the worst possible time. Strategic rest is different from collapse. Strategic rest is planned, intentional, and guilt-free. You schedule rest days where you don't maintain your usual routines, where you give yourself full permission to do nothing productive. This isn't laziness, it's wisdom. Athletes don't train at maximum intensity every single day because that leads to injury and burnout. They build rest and recovery into their training schedules because that's when adaptation happens, when the body gets stronger. The same principle applies to any sustained effort. Rest isn't time stolen from your goals. It's an essential component of achieving them. There's also the practice of distinguishing between physical low energy and emotional resistance. Sometimes what feels like physical depletion is actually emotional avoidance. You don't feel like writing, and you interpret this as being too tired to write, but actually you're anxious about the quality of your work or uncertain about what to write next. The solution to physical depletion is rest or micro-commitments. The solution to emotional resistance is often just starting. Once you begin, the resistance typically dissolves. Learning to distinguish between these requires honest self-observation. Ask yourself, if someone offered me $1 million to do this task right now, could I? If the answer is yes, it's probably not physical depletion, it's emotional resistance. If the answer is no, you might genuinely need rest. This isn't a judgment either way. It's simply different situations requiring different responses. Dealing with self-doubt. Self-doubt is perhaps the most common emotional obstacle to consistency. It's the voice that whispers, "You're not good enough. This won't work. Who are you to think you can do this? You're going to fail eventually, so why bother?" This voice is so common, so persistent, that many people assume it's telling them the truth. But self-doubt isn't truth, it's a protection mechanism. Your brain's primary job is keeping you safe, and safety, in evolutionary terms, means fitting in with the group and avoiding situations where you might be rejected, humiliated, or harmed. When you attempt something new, something challenging, something that might lead to visible failure, your brain perceives threat. Self-doubt is how it tries to keep you safe by preventing you from taking risks. The voice of self-doubt is your ancient survival mechanism trying to protect you from social rejection by convincing you not to try. Understanding this changes everything. Self-doubt isn't evidence that you're inadequate. It's evidence that you're attempting something meaningful, something outside your comfort zone, something that matters enough to feel scary. The most confident-seeming people still experience self-doubt, they've just learned to recognize it as a signal rather than a truth. When self-doubt appears, they think, here's that protective voice again. That means I'm growing. That means I'm on the right track. The key is not eliminating self-doubt, that's impossible and unnecessary. The key is changing your relationship with it. Instead of believing self-doubt and letting it dictate your actions, you acknowledge it and act anyway. I notice I'm feeling doubtful about my abilities. That's uncomfortable, but it doesn't determine what I do next. You're creating space between the feeling and the action. The feeling can be present without controlling your behavior. There's a cognitive technique called diffusion that's particularly effective for managing self-doubt. When you have the thought, "I'm not good enough," you're fused with that thought, you experience it as truth. Diffusion means creating distance. Instead of thinking I'm not good enough, you think I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. This small linguistic shift is psychologically powerful. You're no longer identifying with the thought, you're observing it. And thoughts you can observe are thoughts you don't have to obey. You can take this further. I'm noticing my mind is producing the thought that I'm not good enough. Now you've created even more distance. Your mind produces thousands of thoughts daily, most of them habitual, many of them untrue. You don't have to believe all of them. Self-doubt is just one category of thoughts your mind generates, particularly when you're attempting something challenging. You can acknowledge those thoughts without granting them authority over your actions. Self-doubt also thrives on comparison. When you measure your beginning against someone else's middle, or your private struggles against someone else's public success, self-doubt flourishes. You see their polished output and compare it to your messy process. You see their highlight reel and compare it to your behind-the-scenes reality. This comparison is fundamentally unfair and almost always produces self-doubt. The antidote is focusing on your own trajectory rather than others' positions. Are you better than you were last month? Are you learning? Are you growing? Are you showing up more consistently? These are the only fair comparisons because they're measured against your own baseline, not someone else's different circumstances, different advantages, different timeline. Your only competition is your past self. Your only question is, am I becoming who I want to become? There's also tremendous power in externalizing self-doubt. Instead of experiencing it as an internal, shameful secret, share it. Talk to someone you trust about your doubts. What you'll often discover is that everyone feels this way. The writer you admire doubts their ability to write. The entrepreneur you respect doubts their business decisions. The athlete you watch doubts their performance. Self-doubt is universal. Discovering this doesn't eliminate your self-doubt, but it normalizes it. You're not uniquely broken, you're human. Another perspective shift: self-doubt often increases in proportion to the gap between your current ability and your aspirations. If you want to be a great writer but you're just starting out, that gap is enormous, and self-doubt fills the space. But this gap isn't evidence that you shouldn't pursue writing, it's evidence that you're a beginner, which is exactly what you should be if you're just starting. The gap will close through practice. Self-doubt is actually a sign that you have high standards, which is good. You just need to give yourself time to meet those standards. Ira Glass, the radio producer, has a famous quote about this: "Nobody tells this to people who are beginners." All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But there's this gap. For the first couple years you make stuff, it's just not that good. It's trying to be good, it has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. And your taste is why your work disappoints you. This is the beginner's curse. You can recognize quality because you have taste, but you can't yet produce quality because you lack skill. The solution isn't to doubt yourself, it's to close the gap through practice. Self-doubt in this context is actually a compass pointing toward growth. It's showing you where your skills need development. Finally, there's the practice of accumulating evidence against self-doubt. Self-doubt is a story: I can't do this. I'm not capable. Stories can be revised with evidence. Every time you show up despite self-doubt, you're gathering evidence for a different story. Keep a record of your wins, however small. Maintained your streak for a week? That's evidence. Completed a difficult task? Evidence. Received positive feedback? Evidence. Over time, you build a case against self-doubt that's based on your actual behavior rather than your anxious predictions. The doubt might still appear, but you have a documented counter-argument. Building emotional resilience. Emotional resilience is not the absence of difficult emotions. It's the capacity to experience difficult emotions without being derailed by them. It's the ability to feel frustrated, discouraged, anxious, or sad and still show up for your commitments. It's not about becoming emotionless or invulnerable, it's about developing flexibility in the face of emotional challenges. Resilience starts with a fundamental shift in how you relate to emotions. Most people treat emotions as problems to be solved or avoided. They think, I feel anxious, so I need to eliminate this anxiety before I can act. But emotions don't work that way. Trying to eliminate an emotion before acting is like trying to eliminate waves before swimming in the ocean. Emotions are constant, ever-changing internal weather. The goal isn't to control them, it's to learn to act effectively while experiencing them. Think of emotions as information rather than instructions. Anxiety is information that your brain perceives some threat or uncertainty. It's not an instruction to avoid the situation. Frustration is information that something isn't going as you expected. It's not an instruction to quit. Sadness is information that you've experienced loss or disappointment. It's not an instruction to abandon your goals. When you treat emotions as data rather than directives, you maintain agency. You can feel anxious and still write. You can feel frustrated and still practice. You can feel sad and still show up. This is the core skill of emotional resilience, the ability to hold difficult emotions without being controlled by them. Psychologists call this distress tolerance. It's developed through deliberate practice, intentionally staying with uncomfortable emotions rather than immediately trying to escape them. When you feel anxious, instead of immediately distracting yourself, you pause. You notice where the anxiety lives in your body. You observe how it feels: tightness in your chest, tension in your shoulders, churning in your stomach. You breathe with it. You let it be present without trying to fix it or flee from it. This might sound counterintuitive. Why would you deliberately stay with discomfort? Because avoidance of discomfort is often what prevents consistent action. If you immediately distract yourself every time you feel uncomfortable, you never build the capacity to work through discomfort. But if you practice being with discomfort in small, manageable doses, you discover that emotions are waves. They rise, peak, and fall. They're temporary. And you can tolerate them. There's a meditation practice specifically for this called RAIN, developed by psychologist Tara Brach: recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. When a difficult emotion arises, first you recognize it: I'm feeling anxious. Then you allow it: this anxiety can be here. I don't have to fight it. Then you investigate it with curiosity: where do I feel this in my body? What thoughts accompany it? Finally, you nurture yourself: this is hard. I can be kind to myself while feeling this. This practice builds emotional resilience by teaching you to face emotions with acceptance rather than avoidance. Resilience is also built through reframing. How you interpret challenges significantly affects your emotional response to them. If you interpret missing a day of your habit as evidence of personal failure, you'll feel shame and discouragement. If you interpret it as a single data point in a long-term pattern, you'll feel curious about what caused the miss and motivated to resume. Same event, radically different emotional experience, determined by your interpretation. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset is relevant here. People with fixed mindsets interpret challenges and setbacks as evidence of their limitations: I struggled with this, which proves I'm not capable. People with growth mindsets interpret the same experiences as information for learning: I struggled with this, which shows me where I need to develop. The fixed mindset produces fragile emotions: every difficulty threatens your sense of competence. The growth mindset produces resilient emotions: difficulties are expected parts of learning, not threats to your identity. You can deliberately cultivate growth mindset reframes. When you encounter difficulty, practice asking, what can I learn from this? What's this showing me about what I need to develop? How is this challenge helping me grow? These questions shift your brain from threat mode to learning mode. The difficulty doesn't disappear, but your emotional relationship with it changes. Instead of feeling defeated, you feel curious. Instead of wanting to quit, you want to understand and adapt. Physical practices also build emotional resilience. Exercise, particularly cardiovascular exercise, is one of the most evidence-based interventions for emotional regulation. It reduces anxiety and depression, improves stress tolerance, and enhances overall mood stability. Sleep is fundamental. When you're sleep deprived, your emotional regulation capacity plummets. Everything feels harder, more threatening, more overwhelming. Nutrition affects mood through multiple pathways: blood sugar stability, gut microbiome health, neurotransmitter production. These aren't separate from emotional resilience, they're foundational to it. Social connection is perhaps the most powerful resilience factor. Humans are fundamentally social beings, and we regulate our emotions partly through connection with others. When you're struggling, talking to someone who listens without judgment can shift your entire emotional state. This isn't weakness, it's biology. Your nervous system literally co-regulates with other nervous systems. Being around calm, supportive people helps you become calmer. Isolation amplifies emotional difficulties. This is why community around your goals is so valuable. When you're part of a writing group, a workout community, or an accountability partnership, you're not just getting practical support, you're getting emotional regulation support. When your motivation wanes, others carry energy. When you doubt yourself, others remind you of your capability. When you feel like quitting, others encourage persistence. You're not meant to do difficult things alone. Resilience is partly individual capacity, but it's also collective resource. Finally, self-compassion is central to emotional resilience. Self-compassion, researched extensively by Kristin Neff, means treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a good friend who is struggling. When you miss a workout, a compassionate response is, "This is disappointing, and I understand why it happened. Tomorrow is a new opportunity." A self-critical response is, "You're so undisciplined. You'll never be consistent. You always fail at this." Which response is more likely to lead to resuming your workout practice? Obviously, the compassionate one. Self-criticism doesn't motivate, it demoralizes. It makes you want to avoid the activity that's associated with painful self-judgment. Self-compassion acknowledges difficulty without adding shame, which makes it easier to return to your practice. Resilience isn't built through harsh self-criticism. It's built through supportive self-relationship. Emotional resilience, ultimately, is about becoming someone who can feel everything and still show up. You don't need perfect emotional conditions to take action. You don't need to eliminate fear, doubt, frustration, or sadness. You need to develop the capacity to experience these emotions without being stopped by them. You need to learn that emotions are temporary, survivable, and often informative. You need to build a self-relationship based on compassion rather than criticism. When you can show up on the days you feel terrible, when you can persist despite self-doubt, when you can navigate disappointment without abandoning your goals, that's when you know you've built genuine resilience. Not the resilience of never struggling, but the resilience of struggling and continuing anyway. That's the kind of emotional strength that sustains consistency across years, across changing circumstances, across all the emotional weather that's part of being fully human. Chapter 5: Long-Term Mental Training. How to create a self-disciplined identity. Identity is the most powerful force in human behavior. It's more powerful than goals, more powerful than motivation, more powerful even than willpower. Because while goals can be abandoned and motivation fluctuates and willpower depletes, identity is persistent. Identity is the story you tell yourself about who you are, and that story determines what feels natural, what feels possible, what feels like you. When someone offers you a cigarette and you say no thanks, I don't smoke, that's different from saying no thanks, I'm trying to quit. The first is an identity statement. The second is a goal statement. The identity statement is absolute, it's who you are. The goal statement is conditional, it's what you're attempting. And your brain responds very differently to these two framings. Identity statements create internal alignment. Your behavior flows naturally from your sense of self. Goal statements create internal tension. You're fighting against your current identity to become something different. This is why creating a self-disciplined identity is more powerful than setting discipline-related goals. Instead of "I want to be more disciplined," the identity approach is "I am a disciplined person." Instead of "I'm trying to exercise more," it's "I am an athlete." Instead of "I should write more consistently," it's "I am a writer." These identity statements feel presumptuous at first, especially if your behavior doesn't yet match them.
But that discomfort is precisely the mechanism that drives change.
When you claim an identity, you create cognitive dissonance between who you say you are and what you're currently doing. Your brain doesn't like dissonance, it's psychologically uncomfortable. So your brain works to resolve that dissonance by aligning your behavior with your stated identity. If you identify as a disciplined person, undisciplined behavior feels wrong. It creates internal friction.
Your brain wants to reduce that friction by behaving in ways that match your identity. You're leveraging a fundamental psychological mechanism to drive behavioral change. But here's the crucial nuance: you can't just declare an identity and expect your brain to accept it without evidence. If you've never exercised and you suddenly tell yourself, "I am an athlete," the cognitive dissonance is too extreme.
Your brain has overwhelming contradictory evidence. The identity claim feels false, and your brain rejects it. This is why affirmations alone don't work. Empty declarations without supporting behavior are just wishful thinking. The pathway to identity change is through accumulated behavioral evidence. You become a disciplined person by accumulating evidence of disciplined behavior. Each small act of discipline is a vote for that identity.
James Clear uses the voting metaphor brilliantly. Imagine your identity is determined by an election, and every behavior is a vote.
One vote doesn't determine the election, but the accumulated votes do. You don't need to vote perfectly, you need to win the majority. This means every action matters, but no single action is catastrophic. Missed your morning workout?
That's one vote against your athlete identity, but if you've worked out consistently for weeks, you still have the majority. The pattern matters more than the individual instance.
This is liberating because it removes the all-or-nothing thinking that often sabotages identity change. You don't need perfection. You need consistency, showing up more often than you don't. Start with the smallest possible identity-consistent behavior. If you want to build a disciplined identity, what's the smallest behavior that a disciplined person does? Perhaps they make their bed every morning. That's your first identity-building behavior.
It takes 2 minutes, it's nearly impossible to fail at, and it's a clear vote for person who maintains order and follows through on commitments.
You do this every day without exception. You're casting daily votes for your new identity. Once that behavior is truly automatic, requiring no decision, no willpower, just happening naturally, you add another small identity-consistent behavior. Perhaps disciplined people also plan their day the night before. Now you're making your bed and planning tomorrow before you go to sleep. 2 clear votes daily for your disciplined identity. The behaviors are small, but the identity signal is strong. You're someone who does what they say they'll do, who maintains structure, who thinks ahead. Over months, you're accumulating dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of votes for your disciplined identity. And something shifts.
The identity no longer feels like a claim you're making, it feels like a description of who you are.
When someone asks you to do something that conflicts with your routine, declining doesn't feel like sacrifice. It feels like alignment. "I don't skip my morning routine" isn't a rule you're following, it's who you are. The external discipline has become internal identity. There's also power in declaring your identity to others. When you tell people "I'm a writer" rather than "I'm trying to write more," you're creating social accountability. You've publicly claimed an identity, and humans have deep drives toward consistency between public statements and private actions. You're leveraging social pressure as an identity reinforcement mechanism. Every time someone asks "How's the writing going?" you're reminded of your claimed identity and motivated to behave consistently with it. Language matters enormously in identity formation.
Notice how you describe yourself, even in private self-talk.
Are you using identity language, "I am," or aspiration language, "I want to be"? Are you using present tense, "I am disciplined," or future tense, "I will be disciplined"?
The present tense identity statements are neurologically more powerful because they create that productive cognitive dissonance between current identity claim and current behavior. Your brain works to resolve that dissonance through behavioral change.
Identity also provides decision-making shortcuts.
When you face a choice, should I exercise or skip today, should I eat this or choose something healthier, should I work on my project or watch TV, you can ask, what would a disciplined person do in this situation? The answer is usually obvious. The decision becomes less about weighing options and more about expressing your identity. This reduces decision fatigue and makes discipline feel more automatic. But there's a caution here: your identity should be broad enough to allow flexibility. If your identity is, I am someone who works out at 6 a.m. every day, what happens when circumstances make 6 a.m. impossible? Your identity feels threatened. But if your identity is, I am an athlete who prioritizes movement, you can adapt. Can't do your regular workout? You do stretching. Can't exercise in the morning? You exercise in the evening. The core identity remains intact even as specific behaviors flex to accommodate reality. The most sustainable disciplined identity is one that's integrated with your values. Why does discipline matter to you? What does it serve? If discipline is just something you think you should have, it's shallow and vulnerable to abandonment. But if discipline is how you express your values, perhaps discipline lets you be a reliable person, or it enables you to create things that matter to you, or it helps you be healthy for your family, then discipline becomes meaningful. It's not arbitrary self-restriction. It's value-aligned behavior. That depth of integration makes the disciplined identity much more robust and sustainable. Sustainable routines. Routines are the infrastructure of identity. They're the repeated patterns that cast votes for who you are. But not all routines are created equal. Many routines fail because they're designed based on ideal circumstances, on peak motivation, on temporary willpower. They're not built to survive real life. Sustainable routines are different. They're designed for resilience, for adaptation, for long-term persistence regardless of circumstances. The first principle of sustainable routines is simplicity. Complex routines with many steps, many requirements, many dependencies are fragile. They break when circumstances change. If your morning routine requires 45 minutes of uninterrupted time, what happens when you wake up late? When you have an early meeting? When you're traveling? The routine becomes impossible, you skip it entirely, and the pattern breaks. But if your morning routine has a 5-minute core that's non-negotiable and 15 minutes of optional extensions, you can maintain the core even in challenging circumstances. The routine adapts rather than breaks. Think of your routine as having a minimum viable version and an expanded version. The minimum version is what you do no matter what, even when you're sick, tired, traveling, or overwhelmed. This might be as simple as making your bed, taking 1 minute to plan your day, and drinking a glass of water. The expanded version is what you do when circumstances allow. Perhaps this includes exercise, meditation, journaling, and a full breakfast. On good days, you do the expanded version. On difficult days, you do the minimum. But you always do something. The pattern persists even when the specifics vary. Sustainable routines also account for energy fluctuations. Your energy levels change throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month. A routine that demands peak performance every single day is unsustainable. But a routine that modulates intensity based on your current state is sustainable. Perhaps you have high-intensity workout days and low-intensity recovery days. Perhaps you have deep creative work sessions and administrative catch-up sessions. You're building variation into the routine itself, matching the routine's demands to your realistic energy patterns. There's wisdom in rhythmic variation, alternating between intensity and recovery, between challenging and restorative activities. Athletes call this periodization, structured cycling between high-intensity training and lower-intensity recovery periods. This principle applies beyond athletics. If you write intensely for 5 days, you need a recovery day where you rest or do easier tasks. If you have a week of demanding work, you need a weekend that's genuinely restorative. Sustainable routines build this recovery into the structure rather than waiting until burnout forces it. Environmental consistency makes routines more sustainable. When you perform your routine in the same location at the same time with the same preceding actions, you're creating environmental cues that trigger the routine automatically. Your morning coffee becomes the cue for journaling. Sitting at your desk becomes the cue for focused work. Changing into workout clothes becomes the cue for exercise. These environmental triggers reduce the cognitive load of initiating the routine.
You're not deciding whether to do it. The environment is prompting you to do it.
But sustainable routines also need flexibility protocols for when normal conditions aren't available.
What's your travel version of your routine? What's your sick day version? What's your unusually busy day version?
Having these alternative versions pre-planned means you're not abandoning the routine when circumstances change, you're adapting it. The routine persists through different life conditions because you've designed it to be adaptive rather than rigid. Keystone habits are particularly powerful for sustainable routines. A keystone habit is a behavior that naturally triggers other positive behaviors. Exercise is a common keystone habit. People who exercise regularly often naturally eat better, sleep better, and make better decisions in other life areas. The exercise habit creates momentum that spills over into other domains. By anchoring your routine around one or two keystone habits, you're creating a cascade of positive behaviors from a single point of focus.
Routines also need regular review and optimization.
What's working?
What's feeling forced? What's become truly automatic, freeing up space for new additions? Every few months, audit your routine.
Some behaviors that were initially valuable might no longer serve you. Some behaviors that were too challenging 6 months ago might now be ready for integration. Your routine should evolve with you, becoming more sophisticated as your capacity grows, but always maintaining that minimum viable core that persists regardless of circumstances.
Time blocking can make routines more sustainable by reducing decision fatigue.
Instead of deciding each day when you'll do various activities, you pre-assign time blocks.
Morning is for creative work. Midday is for meetings and collaboration. Late afternoon is for administrative tasks. Evening is for personal activities and recovery.
Within this structure, the specific content might vary, but the rhythm is consistent. Your brain learns the pattern. This time of day is for this type of activity. The routine becomes automatic at the structural level even when the specific tasks vary. There's also the practice of routine stacking, linking multiple small habits into a sequence that flows naturally from one to the next.
After you wake up, you make your bed. After you make your bed, you drink water. After you drink water, you do 3 minutes of stretching. After stretching, you make coffee. After coffee, you journal for 5 minutes. Each behavior triggers the next, creating a chain that's easier to execute than remembering and initiating each behavior separately.
The routine becomes a single integrated action rather than multiple discrete decisions.
Sustainable routines embrace what matters and release what doesn't. Not every good habit needs to be in your routine. Not every productivity technique needs to be implemented. The goal isn't to have the most impressive routine, it's to have a routine that serves your actual goals and fits your actual life. If meditation doesn't resonate with you, don't force it because productivity gurus recommend it. Find what actually supports your well-being and your goals, and build your routine around that. Sustainable means personally sustainable, not adherence to someone else's ideal. Becoming the kind of person who follows through automatically.
Automaticity is the holy grail of consistency. It's when behavior becomes so deeply ingrained, so thoroughly habituated, that it happens without conscious thought, without decision, without willpower.
You don't decide to brush your teeth at night, you just do it. You don't negotiate about whether to put on your seatbelt, you automatically buckle up.
These behaviors have become truly automatic. And any behavior can reach this level of automaticity through sufficient repetition in consistent contexts. The journey to automaticity has stages. In the beginning, every repetition requires conscious effort, deliberate decision-making, and significant willpower. This is the cognitive stage. You're thinking about every aspect of the behavior, and it's mentally exhausting. After weeks of consistent practice, you enter the associative stage.
The behavior requires less conscious attention, though it's still not fully automatic.
You've developed some procedural memory, but you still need to initiate the behavior deliberately. After months of consistent practice in consistent contexts, you begin approaching the autonomous stage. The behavior becomes truly automatic. The context itself triggers the behavior without requiring conscious decision. You sit at your desk at 6 a.m. with coffee, and you automatically open your writing document. You don't decide to write, the environmental context initiates the behavior. This is automaticity. And once a behavior reaches this stage, it requires minimal willpower to maintain. The behavior has become part of who you are. But reaching automaticity requires specific conditions. First, extreme consistency in the early stages. Every day, same time, same place, same sequence. You're training your brain to associate specific contexts with specific behaviors. The more consistent the pattern, the faster the automaticity develops. Early inconsistency delays automaticity because your brain doesn't recognize a clear pattern to automate. If you sometimes exercise in the morning, sometimes in the evening, sometimes at the gym, sometimes at home, your brain struggles to form automatic associations. But if you always exercise at 7 a.m. at home immediately after making coffee, automaticity develops rapidly. Second, remove decision points. Every decision is an opportunity for your conscious mind to intervene and potentially choose differently. But when the behavior sequence is pre-decided, this action always follows that action. Your conscious mind isn't consulted. The behavior chains automatically. This is why implementation intentions are so powerful. If it's 7 a.m. on a weekday, then I immediately put on workout clothes and exercise in my living room. The if-then structure creates an automatic link between context and behavior. Third, start small and expand gradually. Trying to make complex behaviors automatic all at once overwhelms your brain's pattern recognition systems. But starting with micro behaviors that can easily become automatic, then gradually expanding them, works with your neurology. The 2-minute version of your behavior becomes automatic first. Then you can expand to 5 minutes, then 10, then 20. The core initiation is already automatic, you're just extending the duration. Fourth, anchor new automatic behaviors to existing automatic behaviors. You already have dozens of automatic behaviors: waking up, using the bathroom, making coffee, checking your phone, eating meals, going to bed. These are reliable daily anchors. Attach new behaviors to these existing anchors, and the new behavior inherits some of the automaticity. After I make coffee, I write for 5 minutes links a new behavior to an existing automatic behavior, accelerating the automation process. There's also the concept of identity behavior loops. As you consistently perform a behavior, it strengthens your identity. I am a writer. As your identity strengthens, the behavior becomes more automatic because its identity consistent. The behavior reinforces the identity reinforces the behavior. This positive feedback loop is what makes long-term change sustainable. You're not maintaining behavior through willpower, you're expressing identity through automatic behavior. Environmental design is crucial for automaticity. Your environment should be structured so that automatic behaviors are the path of least resistance. If healthy eating is your goal, healthy food should be visible, accessible, and convenient, while unhealthy food requires extra steps to access. If reading is your goal, books should be everywhere you might sit, while your TV remote is stored away. You're designing an environment where your desired automatic behaviors are easier than the alternatives. Tracking is valuable in the journey to automaticity because it provides feedback on consistency. When you can see an unbroken chain of daily repetitions, you're getting visual confirmation that the pattern is consistent. This visibility reinforces your commitment and helps you notice when circumstances are disrupting the pattern. Once you've reached 3 months of daily consistency, automaticity is typically well established. But tracking helps you get to that 3-month milestone by making the pattern visible and making streak breaking psychologically costly. There's also the practice of if-then planning for obstacles. Automaticity develops most reliably when you've pre-planned responses to common obstacles. If I'm traveling, then I'll do the hotel room version of my workout. If I'm sick, then I'll do the minimum viable version of my routine. If I wake up late, then I'll do the abbreviated morning routine. These pre-planned contingencies mean obstacles don't break the pattern, they trigger alternative versions of the pattern.
The core behavior persists even when circumstances vary. Becoming someone who follows through automatically isn't about superhuman discipline.
It's about understanding how automaticity develops and deliberately creating conditions for it. It's about consistency in context, removal of decision points, starting with micro behaviors, anchoring to existing automatic behaviors, and building identity behavior loops.
It's about designing environments and planning contingencies. It's about patience. Automaticity develops over months, not weeks. But once established, automatic behaviors require almost no willpower to maintain. They become simply who you are and what you do. The person who follows through automatically hasn't eliminated the obstacles you face. They've just trained their brain so thoroughly that the obstacles trigger automatic behavioral responses rather than requiring willpower-intensive decisions. They've built infrastructure, routines, environments, identities that makes follow-through the default rather than the exception. And this infrastructure, once built, becomes nearly effortless to maintain. The initial investment of consistent effort pays compound returns in the form of automatic behavior that continues indefinitely with minimal conscious effort. This is the promise of long-term mental training. You invest intensive, conscious effort in the early stages to establish patterns. But over time, those patterns become automatic, freeing your conscious resources for new growth, new challenges, new levels of development. You're not maintaining the same behaviors through perpetual willpower, you're leveraging automaticity to maintain foundational behaviors while your conscious effort focuses on new growth edges. This is how people build extraordinary lives, by automating good behaviors at each level, then building the next level on that automated foundation. Layer by layer, behavior by behavior, identity by identity, you become someone whose follow-through is not a struggle but simply an expression of who you are. Conclusion: the consistent version of you. Reprogramming your internal story. Right now, at this very moment, you're living inside a story. Not a story written in a book, but the story you tell yourself about yourself. This story has been authored over years, composed of thousands of observations, interpretations, and conclusions you've drawn about who you are. Some of these conclusions serve you. Many don't. And the most powerful realization you can have is this: you are both the character in the story and the author writing it. The story you've been telling yourself might sound something like this: I'm someone who starts things but doesn't finish them. I'm not naturally disciplined. I'm lazy. I lack willpower. Other people can be consistent, but it's just not who I am. These sentences feel like truth because you've repeated them so many times. They feel like objective descriptions of reality. But they're not. They're interpretations. They're narratives you've constructed from selective evidence. And narratives can be rewritten. Think about the last time you failed to maintain consistency with something you cared about. What story did you tell yourself about that failure? Did you interpret it as confirmation of your fundamental inadequacy? Did you use it as evidence for the narrative that I always quit? Or did you interpret it as a single data point, a learning opportunity, a moment of temporary circumstance rather than permanent character? The story you choose determines everything that follows. If you interpret inconsistency as evidence of your identity, you'll behave consistently with that identity. The story becomes self-fulfilling. But if you interpret inconsistency as a behavior that doesn't match your true identity, you'll work to bring your behavior into alignment. Same event, radically different trajectories, all determined by the story you tell. Reprogramming your internal story begins with awareness. For the next week, pay attention to how you talk about yourself, both aloud and in your private thoughts. Notice the narrative. Are you describing yourself with fixed labels? I'm just not a morning person, I'm naturally disorganized, I'm the kind of person who gives up easily? These fixed labels are story elements that constrain your possibilities. They tell you who you are in permanent terms, leaving no room for change. Now begin replacing fixed labels with growth-oriented narratives. Instead of I'm not a morning person, try I haven't yet developed a morning routine that works for me. Instead of I'm naturally disorganized, try I'm learning organizational systems. Instead of I'm someone who gives up, try I've given up on some things in the past, and I'm building new patterns of persistence. Notice the difference? The growth narratives acknowledge current reality without making it permanent.
They leave room for change, for development, for becoming someone different. Your internal story is also built from what you choose to remember and what you choose to forget. Your brain doesn't store objective records of your past, it stores interpretations, and those interpretations are filtered through your current beliefs. If you believe you're inconsistent, you'll remember all the times you quit and forget all the times you persisted. If you believe you're disciplined, you'll remember your wins and treat your lapses as anomalies. The evidence for your story is always selectively gathered. This means you can deliberately curate different evidence. Start an evidence journal. Every day, write down one piece of evidence that contradicts your old limiting story. Did you show up to your practice even though you didn't feel like it? That's evidence that you're becoming more disciplined. Did you choose the healthy option when the unhealthy one was tempting? Evidence that you're someone who makes aligned choices. Did you get back on track after missing a day? Evidence that you're resilient and persistent. Over weeks and months, you're building a new evidence base. You're literally rewriting your story with documented proof. When the old narrative tries to resurface, "I'm just not disciplined," you have pages of evidence saying otherwise. The new story isn't wishful thinking. It's documented truth. Language is extraordinarily powerful in story revision. The words you use to describe yourself and your actions shape your self-concept at a deep level. Pay attention to your language. Replace "I have to" with "I get to." This shifts from obligation to opportunity. Replace "I should" with "I choose to." This reclaims agency. Replace "I can't" with "I haven't yet." This opens possibility. Small linguistic shifts create large psychological shifts because language shapes thought, and thought shapes identity. Your story also includes beliefs about what's possible for you. Many people carry limiting beliefs that sound like, "People like me don't do things like that." Success is for other types of people. "I'm too old, too young, too behind to start now." These beliefs are walls built from interpreted experience, not objective reality. And walls built from interpretation can be dismantled through reinterpretation. Question your limiting beliefs directly. Where did this belief come from? What evidence supports it? What evidence contradicts it? Is this belief serving me or constraining me? Often, you'll discover that limiting beliefs are based on outdated information, conclusions you drew about yourself at age 15 that you're still carrying at age 30. You're not the same person. The belief no longer fits. It's time to release it. Reprogramming your story also means being selective about external inputs. The people you spend time with, the media you consume, the conversations you engage in, all of these are constantly feeding narratives into your consciousness. Are the people around you reinforcing your growth story or your limiting story? Are you consuming content that inspires possibility or that confirms limitations? You can't control all external inputs, but you can be strategic about which ones you emphasize and which ones you minimize. Surround yourself, as much as possible, with people and content that reflect the story you're creating rather than the story you're leaving behind. Find communities of people who embody the consistency you're building. Consume books, podcasts, and content from people who demonstrate that change is possible. Let these external narratives support your internal narrative revision. You're not alone in rewriting your story, you're joining a community of people who are all authoring new versions of themselves. Final encouragement and mindset shift. We've covered enormous ground together. We've explored the neuroscience of habit formation, the psychology of motivation, the architecture of systems, the management of emotions, and the creation of identity. We've examined practical strategies and deep principles. But now, as we close, I want to speak to something more fundamental, something that underlies everything we've discussed. You are not broken. You don't need fixing. The struggles you've had with consistency, with discipline, with following through. These aren't evidence of your inadequacy. They're evidence of your humanity. Every human brain is wired to seek comfort, to conserve energy, to avoid uncertainty. Every human experiences resistance, self-doubt, and the pull of distraction. You're not uniquely flawed. You're normally human, navigating genuinely difficult challenges. The difference between people who appear effortlessly consistent and people who struggle isn't that some people are born with special gifts. It's that some people have learned the skills, built the systems, and developed the self-understanding that we've explored together.
And every single one of those elements is learnable. Everything we've discussed is accessible to you. Not someday. Not when you become someone different. Right now, as you are, with whatever you have. I want you to imagine two versions of your future self. In one version, you continue with your current patterns. You start things with enthusiasm and abandon them when the enthusiasm fades. You rely on motivation rather than systems. You interpret your struggles as evidence of personal inadequacy. You repeat the same cycles, hoping for different results but never changing the underlying approach. Where is this version of you 5 years from now? What has changed? What opportunities have been missed? What potential remains unrealized? Now imagine a different version.
In this version, you apply what you've learned. You start with micro-commitments so small you can't fail.
You build systems that make consistency easier than inconsistency. You treat emotions as information rather than instructions. You cast daily votes for the identity you're creating. You show up, especially on the hard days, especially when it doesn't feel like it matters. Where is this version of you 5 years from now? What has accumulated from those daily actions? What has become possible through sustained consistency? Both versions are available to you. The choice isn't made once in some dramatic moment of decision. The choice is made in the small moment right now, then again in the next small moment, then again after that. Will you show up today for the person you're becoming? That's the only question that matters. Not will I be perfect? Not will I never struggle again? Simply, will I show up today? Here's something I need you to understand deeply: the path of consistency is not linear. You will have great days and terrible days. You will have periods where everything flows and periods where everything feels impossible. You will miss days. You will doubt yourself. You will want to quit. This is not deviation from the path, this is the path. The difference between people who build lasting consistency and people who don't isn't that one group never struggles. It's that one group continues through the struggle while the other stops. Every person you admire for their consistency has had moments of wanting to quit. Every accomplished person you respect has faced self-doubt and failure. What you're seeing is their continued effort, not their absence of difficulty. They're not superhuman. They're simply humans who kept showing up. And that option, the option to keep showing up, is always available to you. Even after 100 broken streaks. Even after years of false starts. The opportunity to begin again is never lost. It's waiting in this moment right now. I also want to address the fear that might be present as you consider truly committing to consistency. There's a fear that goes, what if I try my absolute best and still fail? What if I give this everything I have and discover that I'm still not capable? At least now, I can tell myself I could have succeeded if I'd really tried. But if I really try and fail, what story can I tell myself then? This fear is understandable, but it's based on a misunderstanding. There is no final judgment, no moment where your capability is permanently assessed and found wanting. There are only cycles of effort, learning, and adaptation. If you commit fully to consistency for 3 months and don't achieve what you hoped, you haven't discovered your limitation, you've discovered information. You've learned what didn't work, which tells you what to adjust. The only true failure is the failure to learn from your efforts. And here's the truth that fear doesn't want you to know: when you commit fully, when you build systems and show up consistently and apply what you've learned, you don't fail. You might not achieve exactly what you originally envisioned, but you will transform. You will become someone different, someone more capable, more resilient, more self-trusting. That transformation is valuable independent of any specific external outcome. Let's talk about starting. Right now, after reading all of this, you might feel inspired. You might have ideas for what you want to change, systems you want to build, identities you want to develop.
That inspiration is valuable, but it's also dangerous.
Because inspiration creates the illusion that you've already changed. You feel motivated, so you think the hard part is done. But the hard part is what comes tomorrow morning when the inspiration has faded and you have to actually show up. So here's what I want you to do: choose one behavior. Not 5. Not I'm going to completely transform my life. One specific, concrete behavior that represents the direction you want to move. Make it so small that you can't talk yourself out of it.
If you want to build a writing practice, commit to writing one sentence daily.
If you want to become more active, commit to putting on workout clothes each morning.
If you want to be more mindful, commit to taking one conscious breath before opening your phone.
This one behavior is your foundation. Do it every single day for the next 30 days.
No exceptions, no negotiations.
Don't add other behaviors yet. Don't expand it yet. Just prove to yourself that you can show up consistently for this one tiny commitment. You're not trying to achieve a big outcome in 30 days. You're building the skill of consistency itself. After 30 days of perfect consistency with your micro-commitment, something will have shifted. You'll have cast 30 votes for your new identity. You'll have proven to yourself that you can be consistent.
You'll have evidence that contradicts your old story.
From that foundation of proven consistency, you can expand. Add a second behavior. Extend the first one.
But the foundation comes first.
Consistency comes before complexity. Proof comes before expansion.
I also want to release you from the tyranny of productivity culture.
Everything we've discussed about consistency and discipline is not about squeezing more productivity out of your days. It's not about optimizing every moment.
It's not about becoming a machine that produces without rest. The goal is not to do more, the goal is to do what matters to you, with intention, in a way that's sustainable.
Consistency includes consistent rest. It includes consistent boundaries.
It includes consistently saying no to things that don't serve your well-being or your goals. You're not trying to become some impossible ideal of perpetual productivity. You're trying to become someone who shows up for what matters, who honors their commitments to themselves, who lives with intention rather than default.
That's entirely different from grinding yourself into exhaustion in pursuit of arbitrary productivity metrics.
As we close, I want you to feel the weight of possibility in this moment.
Everything could be different. Not instantly, not magically, but truly different.
The version of you that shows up consistently, that follows through, that lives with intention, that version is not a fantasy.
It's a possibility that's activated through your next choice, then your next one, then your next one. Each choice either moves you toward that version of yourself or away from it. The direction is determined by the accumulation of choices, not by any single choice. You are standing at a threshold.
On one side is the familiar, the patterns you've repeated, the story you've told yourself, the cycles you've lived. On the other side is the unknown, the person you could become through sustained consistency, the capabilities you could develop, the life you could create.
Crossing that threshold doesn't require a dramatic leap. It requires a single small step. Then another. Then another. The water droplet doesn't accomplish anything impressive in a single fall. But it keeps falling.
And through that persistence, through that simple consistency, it carves canyons through stone.
You have that same power available to you. Not the power of force, not the power of intensity, but the power of persistence.
The power of showing up, again and again, regardless of how you feel, regardless of whether anyone's watching, regardless of whether the results are immediately visible.
This is your invitation. Not to perfection, not to grinding effort, not to proving anything to anyone. Your invitation is simply to show up. To cast votes for the person you're becoming. To build systems that support you. To treat yourself with compassion when you struggle. To keep beginning, especially after you've stopped. To become someone who, more often than not, does what they said they would do. The consistent version of you is not waiting to be discovered. It's waiting to be created.
Not through dramatic transformation, but through quiet, repeated, persistent action.
Through showing up today. Then tomorrow. Then the day after that. Not because you feel like it. Not because you're certain it will work. But because that's what consistent people do. They show up. Especially when it's hard. Especially when it doesn't feel like it matters.
And in those accumulated moments of showing up, in those thousands of small choices to honor your commitments to yourself, you become someone new.
Someone who can be counted on. Someone who follows through.
Someone whose actions align with their intentions.
Not perfectly. Not without struggle. But consistently. Reliably. Persistently. That person is not a distant dream. That person is the next choice you make. Right now. In this moment. Will you show up? The answer to that question determines everything.